later on. Okay. Hello, everybody. First, good evening and welcome to the PH Shooter Space Roundtable discussion. We do this every Tuesdays and Thursdays. So this is your usual political space. We really try to be non-partisan, but the idea is for us to discuss the national issues and national interest of today without actually the fear of name calling or yun mo yun, yung parang just because we're on the other side we get to fear na parang we discuss and then there's personal attacks ganon. So we've been doing this for months now and we are just so happy tonight because we are going to talk about isa sa mga super popular Twitter space topic talaga. And just timely because I think the sauna is on July 24. So we will talk about the Marcos administration foreign policy and we are super excited to have one really good geopolitical analyst with us who has experiences in government. Sir Justin, kasi di ko alam kung anong pwede ko sabihin. So sorry. I don't know exactly what I can say. But he is an independent geopolitical analyst who has experiences with the government. So I think he is one of the best people to have with this topic. I just wanted to say hi to our special guest tonight. Hello, Sir Justin. How are you?
Hi, good evening. Gandang gabi sa inyong lahat.
Yes. So, Sir Justin, as we, nung nag-usap tayo via DM, the setup of our discussion tonight is we have subtopics and then Sir Justin will tell us a little bit about it and then from that we can ask him questions or we can say our piece regarding the issue. So this is more of really still a roundtable discussion. So Sir Justin, I think we should start with the Marcos administration foreign policy as a whole. Parang from the perspective of a supporter or from the perspective of a Filipino lang, ay yung mga social media people or tweeters or me who has nothing who doesn't know anything about foreign policy. I cling to the idea or I the highlight of the foreign policy of the president will always be what he said during the sauna. Parang sinabi niya that he has an independent foreign policy. Uh, so I'm trying parang siguro iba yung intindi ko as a normal individual with how geopolitical analysts sees that. So sir, maybe you can give us a glimpse of what is really the summary of the Marcos administration foreign policy.
Sure thing. First of all, just call me Justin, everyone. So we're all equal here. So I hope to have to discuss with all of you on equal footing. So all opinions later down the line is free. And also, secondly, I hope na hindi lang siya Q&A. Really, it's really more of a genuine discussion because I also would love to hear your opinions about these issues. First things first, siguro, no, just to discuss my background. I used to work for the government, so that was during the previous administration under the Duterte administration. So I worked at the office of the president, and then I worked at the Department of National Defense as well. Basically, that's where I spent the bulk of my career before I shifted to the private sector, which is what I'm doing right now. So I left government right before the elections. So, but I was there for pretty much the entire Duterte administration. So that's my background. My background is in defense planning in particular. So it's really more of policy work and a lot of monitoring about geopolitical issues ng Pilipinas. With that said, I would like to make a caveat that when I look at foreign policy, especially yung defense aspect of that, I don't try to, as much as possible, hindi ko siya ginagawang academic. It's really more of policy relevant. What does it mean not just at the strategic level, but at the operational level. Operational meaning how this translates sa behavior ng armed forces of the Philippines, ng Coast Guard, for example, when they interact, for example, with Chinese Maritime Militia and Coast Guard at the West Philippine Sea level. Kasi it's good to talk about all these policies in very academic terms. Pero ako, ang focus ko talaga is what does this mean from a government perspective, financially, operationally, at the tactical level, and more importantly, politically, because I also handled political affairs before. So that's how I want to preface this. Um, okay, main point ko, actually, ang foreign policy, no, it has three pillars, no. Since the time of the Ramos administration in the 1990s, we have had three pillars of foreign policy. Number one, the enhancement of national security, which is what we commonly understand with foreign policy. No? I saw a lot of the retweets for this Twitter space sharing that they want to talk about EDCA, US-China relations, etc. So this is really what's popular in everybody's mind. But also, secondly, economic security. That's actually the second pillar of our foreign policy. So this is why you will see, for example, in a lot ng mga foreign visits of a president, state visits, napaka-important to get economic pledges, investments, balancing our trade sheets, and so on. And then thirdly, yung welfare of overseas Filipinos. As many of you know, we have about 2.5 million overseas Filipino workers. And that's not even counting yung mga dual citizen na mga Filipino na nag-immigrate na talaga. So we have 2.5% of our national population that work overseas, and they contribute roughly 10% ng gross domestic product of the Philippines. So that's why this is very important. Maraming mga Pilipino overseas, for example, nakukulong for crimes that they didn't commit, no? And the Philippine government, particularly the DFA, it's the DFA's role na tulungan sila with legal representation. So if you watch yung mga Senate hearings, you will see si Senator Tulfo, si Senator Gatchalian. These are their pet topics. No? Talagang nagigisa ang DFA paano nila tinutulungan yung mga ating mga OFW. Ngayon, in the context ng geopolitical situation ngayon, tahi-tahi na ito, and we will discuss this later. Halimbawa, yung Taiwan issue, we have almost 200,000 overseas Filipino workers in Taiwan. Now, if the administration, for example, shifts too much in favor of the US and gets, provokes the anger of China, what does that mean for the almost 200,000 overseas Filipino workers in Taiwan if there are China-Taiwan tensions down the line? So lahat itong tatlong pillars na ito, economics, national security, and welfare ng overseas Filipino workers, these are all interconnected. So that said, for this discussion, I want to steer this more toward the defense side because that's where my expertise is. No, and secondly, yung Marcos administration has not had a lot of changes in terms of its economic policy and yung welfare of overseas Filipinos. So since the time of President Fidel Ramos, we have had a steady foreign policy in terms of this. So makikita nyo naman yan, no? Hindi naman talaga masyadong election issue, for example lang, how do we promote Philippine trade overseas? Or hindi naman natin pinagdedebatihan if we will protect OFWs, right? So hindi yan contentious. What's contentious right now is the national security policy. Number one, because we have seen yung transition from the Aquino administration to the Duterte administration, wherein we had a radical swing in our China policy, right? So the Aquino administration, we engaged in a policy of open confrontation with China. We took China to court, the permanent court of arbitration, and we sought a legal ruling which categorically said that yung 9-dash line claim of China is invalid and that we do actually have legal claims to that part of the South China Sea, yung tinatawag nating West Philippine Sea. No? So some of those features are owned by the Philippines. So we were able to secure that. But then, of course, China naturally got very angry at that. So nag-sanction sila economically to us. So if you would recall, in the 2014, 2015, for example, nagtigil sila ng mga banana export, which is a major export market for the Philippines. So naapektuhan tayo doon economically. Toward the end of the Aquino administration, just to say the gist of it, some in the business sector are saying that we should have a more balanced policy with China, not openly confrontational. And that has really been the rationale of the Duterte administration in seeking closer relations with China. Now, of course, later we can discuss this na nagkaroon ng criticism with yung sinasabing kowtowing to China. So that's been one of the major criticism na hindi tayo nag-respond enough to the continued incursions in the West Philippine Sea. Now, in theoretical terms, no, ang ginawa ng Duterte administration is very simple. It said na yung territorial disputes ng Pilipinas with China, hindi siya magiging linchpin of our diplomatic relations with China. Hindi siya yung magiging end-all, be-all of our relations with China. So we had territorial disputes, yes, but there was a lot of practical level cooperation on the ground. No? So, for example, dyan yung Belt and Road Initiative of China, no? Yung mga, a lot of the bridge projects na nakikita natin in Manila, and also yung construction, for example, ng Kaliwa Dam, etc. All of those, no, pinondohan ng China. And subliminally, the subtext there, of course, is that they are helping us for that so long as we don't openly confront them in international affairs. So it was a balancing act. Now, during the tail end of the Duterte administration, 2019, dyan tayo nagkaroon ng maraming issues with China because of the issue ng swarming in the West Philippine Sea. So if swarming in the sense na yung Chinese Maritime Militia and Coast Guard usually nagpapadala yan ng maraming around more than 50 vessels in a lot of the Philippine claimed features in the Kalayaan Group of Islands, Scarborough area, etc. And that's when we had a problem because, of course, President Duterte had no choice, of course, but to condemn that. And in 2020, for the first time in the Duterte administration, ni-raise ni President Duterte yung arbitral ruling. It had never done that before. Kasi ang principle natin before, we should not make that the totality of our relations with China. But come 2020, because of all the security issues sa West Philippine Sea, including yung paglubog ng Gemver, di ba, na hindi tinulungan ng Chinese fishermen yung Filipino na mga mangingisda na hindi nila sinaklolohan, all those issues piled up and the Philippines had to respond to China. So that is the context of our foreign relations with China, which the Marcos administration tried to fix. So if you would notice during the campaign period, si President Marcos affirmed the Duterte policy na hindi magiging end-all be-all of our relations yung territorial dispute. And even up to today, you can actually see that. No? So President Marcos, during his speech to the United Nations General Assembly last year, he actually raised yung arbitral award, no? And then you can see na hindi naman masyadong nag-react yung China about it. So ako, ang tingin ko dito, President Marcos is actually a sedimentation or a mixture of the strategies by President Aquino and President Duterte. So as you know, with my experience in government, I tend to look at presidencies in terms of ano yung big picture impact nila, no? I mean, regardless of their politics, what do they contribute to the national security table? So, si President Marcos, if you would look at it, he adopted the lawfare strategy ni President Aquino, which is really to affirm yung mga legal claims ng Pilipinas. But he also adopted parts of President Duterte's strategy, which is really to try to balance good relations with China. And up to now, yung trade with China is our priority because China is our number one trading partner. And not only that, it is also our biggest import market, meaning to say, yung almost 30% ng lahat ng produkto dito sa Pilipinas na ini-import natin, actually galing yun sa China. And you can see that no sa Shopee, yung mga galing sa Shenzhen area, a lot of that, yung mga manufacturing. That is why we're trying to balance relations with China kasi even if we have territorial disputes, the fact of the matter is that meron tayong big economic stake in China. So that's the first point there. And then, secondly, of course, he affirmed yung friend to all, enemy to none, which is actually a policy of President Duterte. This is actually not a new policy. This is a policy under President Duterte. However, dito na nagkaroon ng pagbabago because yung friend to all, enemy to none policy of President Marcos actually entailed closer relations with the United States. Yung Duterte administration, ang interpretation kasi natin ng foreign friend to all, enemy to none policy is basically we do not interfere in geopolitics. So we had a very low profile diplomatically during the Duterte administration. If you would notice, President Duterte himself had very few state visits abroad. No? So, talagang domestic ang focus ni President Duterte, the drug war, um, federalism in the early part of his administration, and then of course the economy, no, yung build project, which is different from the Marcos administration if you look at it, kasi yung mga big policy changes under Marcos is really under foreign and defense policy. Naiba yung friend to all, enemy to none because magkaiba yung interpretation nila. I'm not saying na magkaiba yung intention, nagkaiba yung interpretation. So the Marcos administration is actually a bit more confident right now in dealing with China. For example, nagkaroon tayo ng EDCA, di ba? Nagkaroon tayo ng additional EDCA sites wherein we will allow the United States rotational access in the case of any contingency, whether that's military conflict or natural disaster in the Philippines. And so that has been the approach of the Marcos administration. And he has repeatedly noted that the reason for doing that is yung increased military tensions geopolitically. So that includes yung tensions ngayon between China and Taiwan, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, etc. So siguro I'd wrap up this first part of the discussion by saying uh, na the Marcos approach to foreign policy is what I would personally call flexible enmeshment, right? So I wouldn't call it that the Marcos administration is pro-US because napakalinaw nung Philippine interest why we are undertaking, for example, yung sa EDCA. And that's really part of the defense planning. But I will discuss that maybe in our second part. Ang argument ko is EDCA is actually misinterpreted by China and domestically, no, some of the sectors here. Kasi ang tingin nila sa EDCA is it's a pro-US thing, whereas actually EDCA has long been in the works, no, since 2014 na negotiate yung EDCA. It's been in the works since 2012, and it has something to do with real estate installation management of our Department of National Defense. So matagal nang nabuo yung plans regarding this, no. Hindi pa nagkakaroon ng China-Taiwan tensions. We were supposed to have EDCA already. Although, of course, during the Aquino administration, yung context nga ng EDCA was that we had tensions with China, right? So, but regardless, no, it's not the sole intention of EDCA. So, I think nagkakaroon ng misinterpretation doon. I'll explain that later. But that's the gist of the Marcos foreign policy. So, maybe if you have any initial thoughts about these questions, any points you'd like
I
to
have a
raise?
question. Um,
Sure thing.
what do you think? Okay, about EDCA, kasi people are. I've seen some posts that okay, it's a what you call a military defense infrastructure, right? Or
Yes.
of that sort. But there is a post saying that this will become like some sort of launching pad, just in case Taiwan, U.S. goes decides to go into war with China. What's your thought on this matter? Will it become a launching pad of the US once it decides to go into war against China?
Okay. That's a very good question. I'm sure that's very high on everybody's mind. My answer is that depends on how the administration controls EDCA. Admittedly, nung nagsimula yung EDCA, no, I published some op-eds about this na questioning why the Marcos administration was allowing the United States to do a lot of the press release for EDCA. In fact, no, yung nung na-announce yung EDCA, ang unang nag-press release was the United States, not the Philippines, no. Nalaman na lang which is quite funny na 'di ba na sila pa yung nag-announce pero territory natin 'yon. But ako kasi ang disagreement ko with EDCA is the way it is being explained to the public. But in terms of the intent, the rationale, and the soundness of it from a defense planning perspective, I actually agree with it. So that said, if I know many of you have heard, si President Marcos has affirmed kasi under EDCA, the movements of the American military forces have to be authorized by the Philippine government. So frankly speaking, that is up to our government to tell the United States what types of military operations we are going to allow. Now, in recent months, no, na-realize ni President Marcos na, oo nga, no, hindi niya na-explain na maayos yung policy niya. So if you notice, in the last 2 months, May and June, President Marcos has been very clear that he will not allow offensive military operations from the Philippines. Ngayon, yung question naman dyan, naging criticism was that, um, how can we assure that we are able to restrain the United States? The United States, after all, is the bigger power, right? So what leverage do we have over the United to dictate what the United States can and cannot do? And you know, that's actually a valid criticism. But if you look at it domestically sa Philippines, I'm confident on that safeguard because the Senate, if you look at the Senate, napaka-balanse ng Senate natin right now. So si Senator Amy Marcos, even if kapatid siya ng presidente, she has been very critical of the United States from time to time, which okay, cutting through all the political noise and you know all the our opinions about it, I think that's healthy democratically kasi nagkakaroon ng accountability on the part of DFA and DND to not use EDCA as a launching pad. Secondly, if you look at the terms of yung gagamitin sa EDCA, it's actually really more for logistics agreement, no? So refuel, resupply, etc. We're not actually going to host a lot of American battalions and so forth. Actually nga mas Air Force and Navy siya rather than Army. So we need to clarify that about EDCA. So kasi if you look at it from a Taiwan contingency perspective, it's only useful if you have a critical mass of American forces here in the Philippines. Ang argument ko dito was actually that EDCA is not big enough of an agreement to host a capable strike group, for example, with regard to a Taiwan contingency. Of course, you can disagree with me on this kasi ako ang perspective ko dito is very traditional defense establishment. Pero I'm telling it logistically, yung basis kasi sa okay, ito kasi kailangan ma-explain to. I think hindi na na-explain ng administration. Yung EDCA is actually a compromise agreement, right? If you think about it, smart yung positioning of the administration sa EDCA kasi yung mga bases that na binigyan natin access, these are not major military bases. Let's get that clear. Secondly, meron pa tayong room for escalation or de-escalation depending on our security need. If you notice, we did not grant access to Subic Bay, which is frankly the crown jewel, right? It used to be the crown jewel of the American 7th Fleet, and we did not give access to that. Kaya ako, ang opinion ko talaga dyan, na-misinterpret yan ng Chinese embassy dito sa Pilipinas because to some extent nadala rin sila ng emosyon nila na nagkakaroon ng US bases dito, etc. But you have to look at it from the perspective of the Marcos administration. It is responding to incursions in the West Philippine Sea by beefing up yung ating military bases dito with the help of the United States. Pero ultimately, those are still Filipino military bases. But at the same time, yung mga military bases natin, for me personally, those are not provocative military bases. So, kumbaga nga, low-hanging fruit yung EDCA bases na ginagawa natin eh. Right? Ngayon, ang issue lang dyan kasi, bakit yung iba nasa Taiwan, di ba? Yun yung tanong ni Senator Amy Marcos, bakit marami nasa Taiwan? Malapit sa Taiwan. They are in Northern Luzon, sa Cagayan, sa Isabela, and so forth. Ako, ang response ko dyan is very simple. Hindi lang Taiwan actually yung problema natin in the northern part of the Philippines right now. Ang problema natin is the Philippine rice, no? Yung Benham rice, that is in the northeast of the Philippines. We also won a legal entitlement to that. Ngayon, ang naging problema kasi, during the tail end of the Duterte administration, the government started spotting Chinese, ang tawag nila doon, maritime surveillance and research ships, no? Allegedly for civilian and benign purposes. But because sobrang dami, the government is concerned and it has to respond there. Frankly speaking, very hinog ang naval bases natin in the northern part of the Philippines. Kaya if you notice, for example, President Duterte has been criticized, sasabihin, President Duterte is very pro-China. Pero tingnan nyo, 2019, when China, yung Fuga, kung familiar kayo dun sa Fuga naval base that's in northern Luzon, di ba? blinak ng Philippine government yung planned takeover of Fuga Island or development by Chinese corporations precisely because concerned tayo doon sa Philippine rice or Benham rice sa northeast natin, which is actually also close to Taiwan, no? So we were concerned about that. So anyway, I'm going on, pero yun yung the logic of the defense agreement kasi hindi lang siya about Taiwan. It's also about the broader northern approaches of the Philippines. And the fact is, we don't have a lot of good defense systems there. As a matter of fact, last month lang tayo nag-launch ng coastal defense system in the northern part of the Philippines. The Philippine Marines launched a coastal defense system doon. So isipin mo yun, for the past how many years, we don't have a coastal defense system in the northern part of the country. We only now na nagko-construct tayo doon. So that's the technical explanation for it. I think
Yeah.
someone wants
Yes.
to.
Yes. Hold on. Hold on lang. Wait lang, Hans. Justin, ano na yung sinabi mo na how you describe the Marcos administration foreign policy? Was it
Flexible
flexible?
enmeshment. Yes.
Enmeshment.
Flexible.
Yes. Okay, so yeah. All right. Go ahead, Hans, if you want to say. Wait, before Hans. Sir Justin wanted this to be just like any other roundtable discussion. So you can request for a mic, you can ask questions, or you can say your piece regarding the topic. Right now, we are on the topic of the whole yung parang Marcos administration foreign policy. So we'll get into more details about the EDCA, the West Philippine Sea, the current geopolitical situation that we have here on later. Pero ngayon nandun pa lang muna tayo sa umbrella question about the Marcos administration foreign policy. Go ahead, Hans. Hans, ikaw na.
Hello. Narinig ko yung mga concerns ng mga ayaw sa EDCA. Me being one of them, honestly. Ay, hindi dahil sa EDCA itself, pero yung expansion ng EDCA na in fact nag-expand sila dun sa north side sa North Luzon, which is more strategic. And sinabi mo na yung talagang yung crown jewel na base ay yung nasa Subic. That's true, but it's convenient enough yung mga bases na nasa North Luzon, specifically dahil may nabasa ako, may napanood akong video sa YouTube na sinabi na yung mga bases sa Northern Luzon, sapat na yon para sa Tomahawk range ng kung gagamitin man yun ng US. And again, I just want to know what your thoughts are about that, Sir Justin.
Justin
Yun
lang,
lang sa
please.
ngayon.
We're all equal here. Yeah. Thank you. No, I appreciate that question. No, actually, to be honest, no, that's one of the gaps of the Marcos administration foreign policy right now. Kasi hindi malinaw ano yung red line natin sa US. Diba? How do we, kumbaga, for the lack of a better term, how do we put a leash on the United States once they are back in our house, right? Nasa bakura natin sila, right? That's really the point. In terms of itong Tomahawk missiles na to, actually, let's put this into context. Actually, panahon pa ng Trump administration, nag-offer na sila sa atin ng short range and intermediate range ballistic missiles. And we all know that the Trump administration was a bit more, way more aggressive than either the Obama administration or the present Biden administration. So that was very threatening to China. But the Philippines has repeatedly turn that down. Kasi we also understand na meron din tayong understanding of what could be perceived as provocative toward China. Ngayon, so okay, ando na yung political side, correct? Ito naman yung defense planning side. So if we censor ourselves from placing missile systems sa Luzon out of fear of how China would react, does that mean hindi na tayo under any circumstance maglalagay ng missile defense system in Luzon, right? Actually, we do have one missile defense system right now here, which is yung mga BrahMos missiles. Pero that is closer to Manila. We understandably kasi we need to protect the capital. But I will give an example. No? South Korea. Yung South Korea ngayon under President Yoon Suk Yeol, it wanted yung terminal high altitude na missiles, no, which is a missile defense system nila for North Korea. Ngayon, inoppose yun ng China kasi sabi ng China, yung missile defense system na yun is also offensive to their own missile defense capabilities. Sinasabi nila na, yung US, inuudyukan lang yan yung South Korea, that's why you want to have yung THAAD missiles, right? Pero yung South Korea is very clear. Sabi nila, hindi naman namin to gagamitin against China, gagamitin namin to against North Korea. Kasi what alternative do we have? Are we saying that hindi tayo magkakaroon ng missile defense system in the northern part of the country? So yun yung, from a defense planning perspective, yun yung mahirap eh. Kasi hindi natin pwedeng hindi lagyan ng missile defense system yung northern Luzon. And in fact, the entire country should have a missile defense system. Now, we should balance that by, a simple ang solution dyan. The missile system should be Philippine-owned and controlled. Hindi dapat maglagay yung United States of its own missile systems in the Philippines. That's the short answer to that, no? And I don't think, based from my discussions with the officials of the current admin, they're not interested in this. Ngayon, that may change subsequent administrations, no, who may have a different opinion than the Marcos administration. Pero ako, I would make a devil's advocate opinion about it. Yung uncertainty na yon, no, yung nagpapakaba sa China na yon, I would actually say that is beneficial to the Philippines. Kasi kapag kabado ang China, the more reason you have for China to be on the good graces of whoever is the president. Right? And that's actually what's happening right now in the Marcos administration, if you notice. November last year, the Marcos administration raised the arbitral ruling. Sinabi ni President Marcos in the UN, atin yung part ng West Philippine Sea that we are claiming. If President Aquino was the one who made that in 2015, 2016, China would have protested that. But right now, lahat ng baraha is actually with President Marcos vis-a-vis China. And you can see, China has actually not criticized President Marcos for that. Merong mga complaints, of course, occasional complaints in Chinese embassy. But did you notice, they no longer take offense so much dyan sa arbitral ruling na yan. Right? And for me, that is a diplomatic victory for the Philippines kasi we now agree to disagree. And that's yun yung important thing, no? So if you look at it, no, regardless of your politics, we benefited from the previous presidents. We benefited from the Aquino administration because it secured us that arbitral ruling. We benefited from the Duterte administration partly because nakita ng China na, pwede ko palang gawing friends ang presidente ng Pilipinas. Pagdating ng Marcos administration, they're not sure about how the president would behave, so they tried to be on the good graces of the president. So that is beyond yung EDCA and the missiles, etc. That is the broader political context ng EDCA, right? So I think for me, that is a diplomatic win para sa Pilipinas and we should continue to do that. Kasi I think ito masyado tayong takot na to do anything about West Philippine Sea at the moment for fear that China will respond to it, right? Which in my opinion is a slippery slope argument kasi kung ganun yung argument natin, wala na tayong gagawin na defense modernization or any plan to secure our national sovereignty, right? So ang important lang doon is to just calibrate yung level of response natin. And the one thing we have going for us right now is a good political position. So China has said it opposes EDCA, yes. Pero you look at it, we announced EDCA, we said we will have more additional bases. Nag-impose ba ang China ng economic sanctions sa atin? It didn't, right? So that really shows you that the administration has the leverage vis-a-vis China. And China doesn't want to make so much of an issue ng EDCA because it understands na fundamentally, these EDCA bases aren't threatening to its own national security, to be honest. Napaka-konti ng EDCA bases compared to the number of bases that China has. In fact, China has so many bases near Palawan. Yun nga yung naging problema natin eh. So actually, the EDCA is actually a corrective action by the administration toward China. So yeah, that's a very long answer. So I'm sorry if I went off tangent a bit.
No, it's okay. Sobrang dami kong ina-absorb the information from you. I think Alex has a question. Go ahead, Alex.
No, I'm actually like I will re-listen to this space many times because there is a lot to unpack and to we're glad that you are here on the space, Justin. I just wanted to ask, like, So you mean to say that some people say kasi na parang, oh, Marcos is leaning towards, being a pro-US, and we are turning into a vassalhood or some kind of vassal state. But this is not the case, right? Because sabi mo nga, Justin, I mean, this is a good time. I mean, if China was like going against the foreign policy of PBBM, you would just have to observe how they react on the
Yes.
EDCA itself, and you know the words that they are not saying, it is resonating, it is glaring, it is speaking, it is shouting, screaming a lot about their stance on EDCA, right, Justin?
Yes, oo. So, if you notice, no, yun nga, I mentioned that China has actually protested to ex-President Duterte. He said na every week daw siyang kinakausap ng Chinese ambassador complaining about EDCA and all of that. Pero sa akin kasi, yun yung level of uncomfortability ng China that is politically acceptable to them. Tingnan niyo yung reverse side, no? Nung nagtayo yung China ng military bases sa South China Sea na malapit sa Palawan, at lahat yon within striking distance ng Metro Manila, which is inimical to Philippine national interest, tinanggap yun ng Pilipinas. Out of political realism, kasi we really can't do anything about it, no? We can't bomb those bases, no? Nandun na yun eh. Tinanggap yun ng Pilipinas, no? And to some extent, hindi siya naging life or death situation for us, right? Ngayon, kumbaga, a pop culture reference, na uno reverse card ngayon ang China. So it has to live with EDCA. It is uncomfortable, but it is not, frankly speaking, it's not a red line for China. Otherwise, we would know, right? Sorry, just you have something to say.
Ay, yeah, sorry. So, since we're nandiyan na tayo sa train of thought mo na yan, because someone actually just pull up uh SMNI news ano to art card or parang screenshot. It was actually the President Duterte saying that the Philippines will be a graveyard once the war comes. This is in reaction na this is in reaction to, you can see that from the comment.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is in reaction regarding the EDCA basis.
Yes.
Also, I'm sure you also read some of the influencers with geopolitical background saying that once the because of the additional EDCA sites, there will parang offend the
Mm.
China, and then
Actually,
comes war, things like that.
yeah.
What do you think about that?
Okay. Actually, ang opinion ko dyan, let's look at China's statements from the perspective ng People's Liberation Army, which is their military. And always yan, ang first tactic nila is psychological warfare. No? What is their strategic goal in the Philippines? It's really for the Philippines to stop improving our military bases. That is the bottom line about it. No? So, ngayon, they are actually amplifying yung warnings nila about EDCA na magagalit kami dyan, magiging graveyard ang Pilipinas, etc. And that's normal. That's actually a threat that's actually a normal, you will actually expect that, no? Now the question is, realistically, do you think China would be able to carry that out, no? Let's say, for example, assuming for the sake of argument na magkaroon ng China conflict, no? If many of you are familiar dun sa mga military studies on this, China would basically have to devote more than half of its military to invade Taiwan. Ngayon, ipasok mo dun yung United States into the equation, and basically China will have its hands tied or hands full just with Taiwan. It's not going to, realistically, this is a very safe estimate, realistically, it's not going to have time to attack Philippines or Japan, etc. Why? If you were China, and ang area of operations mo lang is Taiwan, do you want to expand the theater of conflict to Philippines and Japan, which is a broad area that's a several thousand kilometer front? So for me, the way I look at China's statements right now, this is pure psychological warfare. I'm not saying we have to disregard yung mga concerns ng China, no? We still have to be careful not to do anything that's overly provocative toward China. Pero wag tayo din magpatalo to the argument na yun kasi ano yun eh, at some extent you have to call China's bluff because China is bluffing, no? You can see this in the Russia-Ukraine war na great powers actually are not as strong as they think they are. It's always their interest to inflate their power. You look at the United States, no? The United States went to Afghanistan, it invaded Iraq. Many years later, it had to pull out because it cannot win the fight there, right? It cannot overextend itself. I would actually argue that if we have the same perception of the US, if we have the same perception of Russia, we should also have the same perception of China. China knows its limitations. So, wag nating ibigay yung West Philippine Sea sa kanila on a platter. Let's not go with their strategic objective. So, yun talaga yun eh. If you notice, no, talagang ang objective talaga nila is to to prevent as much as possible yung military modernization of the Philippines, no. The simple reason for this is a strong Philippines deprives them of freedom of navigation and operation in the South China Sea and in the Western Pacific. Their military objective by 2027 is to be the dominant regional naval force, and they are on track of doing that. And we are the bulwark against that. So tayo, we're not opposing China because we want to contain China's rise. Yun yung difference natin sa US. We are opposing China because we want that our territorial waters are secure. And dun siya nagka-clash with China kasi China has a very expansive 9-line claim in the South China Sea. So, that's my thought about it, no, that this is really political warfare at this stage right now. In fact, the PLA is just modernizing right now. And we have to remember na ang People's Liberation Army has not fought a war since Vietnam in the 1970s, 80s. Kaya nga ang tawag nila dyan, the untrained military or a military without combat experience ang China. And a lot of the Chinese academics, they actually say that in public. Na totoo yun. So, yan ang ano ko dyan. Tinatakot tayo ng China, so wag masyadong, go along.
No, just to add that, Justin, like even their naval warships, it's not. I mean, they were buying a lot of warships, diba? But nobody has tested this in an actual war. Like whatever warships they are
military,
constructing.
All right, thank you. Hans, you want to say something? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Imbis na pag-usapan yung mga military confrontations, gusto ko na pag-usapan yung mga claims at yung parang buong discourse pagdating sa mga claims natin sa South China Sea at sa territory natin doon banda sa Spratly Islands at iba. So ano masasabi mo sa competing claims natin sa China at sa Vietnam in terms of its legitimacy, considering na syempre, I mean, aside from China, syempre, sa Vietnam, meron din tayong competing na maritime claims. So, pag ang China yung kalaban natin, or sorry, pag yung China yung sa discourse, sorry, kapag yung China ang pinag-uusapan natin, syempre, parang feeling talaga natin na hindi nila yung deserve. Pero syempre, pagdating naman sa Vietnam, it's a little different kasi hindi naman natin sila tinuturing na kalaban. But yet they also have a claim to that. So, paano mo ma-distinguish yung claims in terms of legitimacy? Kasi pag maritime territory kasi mas mahirap ilagay yung mga lines in the sand. Sorry, lines in the water. Kasi pag border, madali lang. Pero pag sea, medyo mas mahirap i-specify kung saan mismo yung mga linya ng At can you explain yung EEZ in general? Yun lang.
Sure thing. Siguro I'll take one more point from Sia and then sum up ko para mas marami akong ma-respond na questions.
Thea? You want
Hi,
to say?
Justin. Thank you for your enlightening explanation on the Philippine stance on EDCA. So, even though I have a pro EDCA stance, I have never regarded the admin stance as pro US. So, basically, it is for me a very good pro PH stance. And I just want to make a short comment that the problem with most opinions these days with regard to our treaties and bilateral agreements with either the US or China is that we always insert the US versus China narrative instead of what's in it for us as Filipinos. What's in it for us when with regard to the agreement at hand. So I guess when we look at EDCA, we should just look at what's in it for us as far as this agreement is concerned. Yeah, we can provoke China, but the reactions of China should not affect our decision and should not compromise our decision. And Justin, it's interesting that with the expansion of EDCA sites in the Philippines, it seems to me that the president is using these sites or EDCA in general as a bargaining chip to assert the PCA ruling. And it seems that China is taking this assertive stance by the Philippines quite, seriously. And so my first question is, do you think that the geopolitical conditions in the West Philippine Sea in the near future, so I'm talking about within the Marcos presidency, will improve in favor of the Philippines? Because right now kasi, ang dami kong nababasa, especially on, you know, uh, geopolitical forums na they're sort of laughing at our claims na especially the PCA ruling. So do you think that with this assertion our sovereign rights and jurisdiction will be respected by all countries? So that's one. Second is, do you think the Congress should expedite passing the Philippine Maritime Zones Law and the Archipelagic Sea Lanes Law? Kasi yung mga laws na to, it will assert our sovereignty, yung sovereignty rights natin, jurisdiction over our waters, and then, finally we can, put together our archipelagic house in order. So, parang for me, I personally think that once we have these laws, then we can confront yung mga challenges, especially when we look at international order. They are always rule based, and they always look at the UNCLOS basically as basis. So yun yung dalawang questions ko. Thank you.
Thank you. So basically, all of the two questions ni Hans and ni Thea, these relate to our claims in parts of the South China Sea or parts of the West Philippine Sea. No? Ako, okay. The way I would respond to this is a bit more from a political perspective. No? So there's no question na talagang mayroon tayong overlapping claims with Vietnam, for example. In fact, we do have overlapping claims with Taiwan as well, no? Which is interesting, no? Kasi yung Taiwan is actually very supportive of EDCA. So lahat ng mga politicians that have spoken in Taiwan before, they're very supportive of EDCA, hoping that hindi nga sila nag-hope na sasaklolohan natin sila. It's just really they hope that China will be deterred if there are more US forces. But anyway, that's beside the point. No, we have competing claims with our fellow ASEAN countries as well with regard dito. And if for the past how many years kasi ang strategic communications policy of the government has been to downplay and not talk about these issues as much. That's the frank answer to that. And the reason for that is, yes, meron tayong disputes with Vietnam, Taiwan, etc. in those parts of the sea. Pero hindi kasi siya, they don't rise to the level of what we would call really an existential national security threat, because yung Vietnam, of course, they're building bases as well there, but they're not putting yung weapons at the scale na ginagawa ng China. So that's the short answer to that. And then secondly, Vietnam is more manageable kasi tinutulungan tayo ng Vietnam with maritime law enforcement as well. So halimbawa kapag may mga na-accost na fishermen in that area, binabalik sa atin ng Vietnam. Vice versa, we also return yung mga Vietnamese poachers as a sign of goodwill. So from a political standpoint, hindi siya hindi natin inaaway yung Vietnam or Taiwan for that matter, or and other claimants, Brunei, etc. Because hindi natin pinapantay yung level of threat perception natin sa level ng China, right? So that's the thing. And then secondly, um, in terms of the legitimacy of the claims, ako medyo mas realistic yung outlook ko dito. For me, my opinion is this: it's not my place to question the national position of the Philippine government. Since the time of President Marcos Sr., so this is 1960 plus, no? We laid claim to the Kalayaan Island Group. And in fact, when we laid claim to that, nagalit yung mga neighboring countries natin. But that is our national interest to claim that area because we have an effective human presence there. We have a we have a solid legal claim to that. Ang ginawa ni President Marcos during the 70s, he reinforced those with military bases. So actually, ako medyo mas realistic ako dito na hindi lang kasi batas yung basihan ng claims natin. No? It's also about how we enforce those claims. And lucky for us, we have a favorable arbitral ruling going for us. And then right now, of course, we also have widespread support internationally. On the point na medyo nagiging parang laughing stock tayo, actually medyo I don't get that sense no, when there are yung mga government and non-government dialogues abroad. Actually, naiintindihan nila yung claims ng Pilipinas. They just don't want to intervene precisely because it's Philippines versus China. And if you would notice throughout ASEAN, that's the position of everybody. So Indonesia, which is the ASEAN chair right now, sabi nga ng Indonesia, ASEAN is not the forum to resolve territorial disputes. We will only facilitate dialogue. So that's very clear, no? Na wala siya sa scope ng ASEAN kasi nga it's a bilateral territorial sovereign dispute between Philippines and China. So hindi sila nangingialam about it. Frankly speaking, we should not expect our neighbors to help us, no? And nor should we, to be honest, kasi it's our fight. It's our fight and it's not their fight, no. It's our same argument for Taiwan. It's not our fight. So it's the same thing with South China Sea na hindi natin ina-agit yung mga neighbors natin to side with us. What we are expecting them, however, is at least for ASEAN to not actively derail our efforts, no. If you notice, a lot of the support dito sa arbitral award natin actually comes from Europe and the US, no. So lahat ng mga nagbibigay ng suporta sa atin of our claims is the United Kingdom, France has also aided us, the United States, of course, Canada, etc. And for me, that's good enough, no? Na we don't need formal declarations from our neighbors kasi that would only make the conflict worse kasi China would say na oh, ASEAN is ganging up on us. So I think personally okay na yung stance ngayon. We don't need to be this moral crusader in ASEAN na lahat kayo dapat panigan nyo kami. Actually, nami-misinterpret yan kasi last month I was in the Shangri-La Dialogue, no, which is like a major security conference in the Asia Pacific. In-explain ko to a lot of the delegates, especially the Indonesians who are very skeptical of the Philippine position. Sabi ko, we're not actually asking you to fight with China. We're just asking you to basically not impede in our efforts to raise awareness for the arbitral award, no. So that's the strategic situation there. On yung point about laws about maritime delimitation, yung archipelagic sea lanes natin, no, we also have yung archipelagic baselines, and in addition to that, yes, we definitely should fix all of these. And to be honest, we are making good progress on this. I don't know if you saw the news, pero recently natapos natin yung maritime boundary delimitation natin with Indonesia. So it's possible. And it took us, I think, more than 15 years, if I'm not mistaken. Please correct me. It took us more than 15 years to negotiate that with Indonesia. Tapos kakatapos lang niya this year. So we are making good progress about that. Kaya hindi ako naniniwala dun sa argument na, kasi oh, what about yung claims ng Vietnam? What about yung claims ng Taiwan? But the fact is, hindi naman tayo nag-aaway sa kanila ngayon. So we should not actively seek more enemies than we can handle. No? So we actually talk with them regarding these things. So in this respect, things are going well for us. And then final point I would like to make. na ako ito hindi ko to inexpect no. Nagawa to ng Marcos administration. Um if you have seen the news lately, yung India, which is a major power, no, it's part of the quadrilateral security dialogue. It's a major supplier natin of missiles and defense equipment. And of course, a rising economy. India actually, for the first time, supported the Philippine Arbitral Award. They never did that. It's the first time they did that. And um, I would say to some extent, no, during that last administration, yung naging problema natin was that masyado tayong natakot sa China. We didn't ask for support that much. Whereas, as we see right now, willing naman pala sila to give that kind of support for us. And if you know the geopolitical context, why is India supporting our legal claims right now? Does it really believe, does anybody in this room really believe that India is doing that out of its goodwill? No. India is doing that because of its rational interest. Because right now may mga territorial disputes ang India with China, right? So that's why they're supporting us right now. So we're just shoring up on our allies to advance our national interest. All of this is really about rational self-interest of countries, and there is nothing wrong with rational self-interest of countries. So I think that is the biggest achievement right now, getting India on our side. That is a major diplomatic victory for us. I did not expect it, but it's going to be useful for us. So I think that made headlines right now talaga. And it gives our foreign policy credibility kasi dati ang nagsusupport lang sa claims natin would be a lot of Western countries right now. We also have part India. So it doesn't have to accept all of the claims per se, but it is urging China to respect the arbitral ruling.
All right, thank you, Justin. Yeah, just in case you're just tuning in, welcome to the roundtable discussion about the Marcos administration foreign policy. We have a geopolitical analyst, Sir Justin, with us, and I know we already talked about a lot of things. So please go back to this recording because you missed kung papasok mo pa lang, you missed a lot about this topic. So yeah, go ahead, Miss Dea.
Justin, why are you not on national TV to explain all these things? Like I have learned so much just
No.
by tuning into you.
Actually,
Uh,
oh sorry.
yeah,
Please
so
continue.
pero yung question ko is this. In line with the Marcos administration's assertiveness, especially when it comes to the PCA ruling, do you think that we should update the official Philippine map, to depict the meters and bounds of land and maritime domains? Because, if we are asserting, we might as well pass laws that will allow us to really insist, on our position, since our position is consistent with the UNCLOS and the 2016 PCA ruling that
Mhm.
map and
I'll
laws.
right. I'll answer that very shortly. No, I think ako to be honest, I agree with the approach of the previous two governments na hindi natin minamadali ito because if we do pass laws and nag-overlap siya with the other claimants, then magkakaroon tayo ng panibagong diplomatic dispute internationally. So right now, I think they're taking their time about this. Nagiging political yung approach rather than legal. We're seeking dialogue first with our neighbors. Parang yun sa Indonesia, right? Inayos muna natin yung maritime borders natin. And then in-announce na lang sa TV, tapos na. And I think that's a very smart approach because we're not going on to the UN making enemies left and right in this region. We are doing the necessary quiet work quietly. And that is for me the smart approach. Hindi siya flashy, hindi siya it doesn't earn the administration points no for being this parang celebrity rock star na foreign policy crusader, but it's the right approach for me right now. If we do raise it right now, kasi ang problem naman natin, the AFP is just modernizing. So it's not, ako personally, for me, it's not the time to shake the boat. If the other claimant states are okay to fix the maritime delimitations with us, then all in good. Let's go for it. Pero unahin muna natin yung political conversations with our neighbors. That's my opinion about it. So it's a bit of a political reason. It's not really illegal, to be honest. I agree, we should have all those things. It's a question of paano natin gagawin yun in a way that's sustainable for our country.
We have Sir Digital who has a question for you, Justin. Go ahead, sir. Digital, um, si Bud, si Sir Bud.
Oh yeah. Good morning, everybody. First of all, and great topic, great audience, and great feedback. Justin, I agree with you,
Hello?
but
Is it
I
just
just
me
have a
or
comment
napuputol yung
on
audio?
my point of view. You guys hear me? Hello.
Yeah, go ahead, Sir
Okay.
Bud. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
My point of view on this one is I want to address the foreign policy first of Marcos administration. I think the it's constantly in the U.S. and the one right there. I am very optimistic that it's a positive and a great approach. Okay, it's not because I'm an American citizen, but soon I will be a dual citizenship, person. But I think that one right there, the EDCA, is a very good move in general. Okay, so long as it's used the right way. We just have to impose and make it clear to the US that they cannot launch any kind of attack from our country. All right, going to any nearby, especially Taiwan and China. We have to be clear on that one. And secondly, on the ruling of the UN on the West Philippine Sea. It is a very complex issue, actually. All right. So it's going to be a lifetime, okay, generations of arguments, regarding our sovereignty, regarding what China's stance is. It will never get resolved. So the best approach on the what President Marcos is doing and his administration is that the bilateral talks, progressive bilateral talks is the way to do it. All right. If we impose something, you know, China will not respect it anyway. We tried several times. The ruling is there. However, China is not respecting it. So the background where Marcos administration is doing all it can on the negotiations and progressive bilateral talks is the best approach. We can never solve this one in our lifetime. That is a fact. So what are we gonna do? Work with China, okay, on a bilateral talk that is progressive that will benefit us. Okay, we especially the fishing grounds, which is number one of our concerns. All right, we have to be clear on that one with China. What's happening is we tell them something, we protest, nothing is happening. So it needs to be it needs to be addressed, and whatever is happening in the background, the administration should give a light on the Filipino people so that we will know what's going on. That's all my comment. Thanks.
Thank you. Si Mark? This is Mark. Tama ba? Mark ba to?
Marcus.
Marcos?
Sir,
Yeah,
go ahead, Sir Marcus.
Marcos.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, kay Justin, for gracing the roundtable discussion. We received a lot of good information, and I'm happy na satisfied kayo sa steps being undertaken by the Marcos government. Question ko is, what's the next step for us? Na ano yung in-expect? Yung kasing worst case scenario na magigera ang US at China over Taiwan at matadamay ang Pilipinas. I don't believe na mangyayari ang scenario na yan. Walang siraulo na on both sides ng US at ng China na uumpisahan yan. I don't see that happening at all. Ano yung next step dito na ina-expect nyo na gagawin ng government natin, considering na yung ibang provocative action ng China is nangyayari pa rin, although nami-minimize na ngayon. Sabi nga ng mga mangingisda natin, parang konti na lang yung nai-encounter nilang opposition sa West Philippine Sea compared sa nakaraan. Ano yung ina-expect nyo na next step na kailangan gawin ng government natin? Thank you. Thank you in advance. Thanks.
Thank you. This is a fantastic question. No? Talagang very forward-looking, so I appreciate it. Okay. How do I say this? So recently, I've been in talks with some defense officials. I gave them advice on what are the next steps. I also got their opinion about it. So medyo nakita ko na we have two components going forward. Number one, the administration will have to balance yung diversify our defense cooperation portfolio, no? Kasi ang criticism sa atin ngayon, puro US and US allies yung cooperation agreements natin, no? We are looking for a status of visiting forces agreement with Japan. And then of course we are looking to upgrade our strategic partnership with Australia. So all of these are US allies. So it doesn't politically, no, talagang it doesn't help the administration look like it is balancing. So kaya siya nakikriticize na parang pro US, but nami-misinterpret kasi 'yon. Ang next step talaga dyan for me is to try to look for non-traditional security partners. Right now, we have made progress with India, right? Yung na-mention ko to kanina, no, na tinulungan tayo to race with China yung arbitral award. And then secondly, we are also, and ito, bibisita sa Pilipinas in the coming days, South Korea. South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol, we will actually elevate our partnership with South Korea to strategic partnership. South Korea is very important kasi dyan kumukuha yung Navy natin ng maraming assets, no? Whether that's yung mga Hyundai na mga missile systems and also patrol vehicles, no? And also South Korea is a very tech driven country, so we are looking toward them for defense industrial cooperation, no? Defense industry, how we produce, manufacture ammunition, supplies, etc. Israel is also, yung Israel nasimula na to under the previous administration, so we just need to continue this. Yung Israel, we do that for the counterterrorism bit, no, kasi Israel has a very good operational experience dealing with terrorism, so maraming tututunan ng AFP natin dyan. So that's the next thing. What I advise to government when I meet with some officials is always that na try to masahihin naman yung criticism na masyado tayong pro-US by diversifying the portfolio. Now, I'm realistic. I always tell the officials, realistically, talagang primarily US pa rin ang security partner natin, but we have to diversify for political reasons, no? So that's the main dyan. Secondly, what we need to do next is to continue with capability build up, no? And to some extent, we have to grow beyond yung revised AFP modernization law, because the AFP modernization law actually ends with the Marcos administration, yung third horizon of our modernization law. And the third horizon of the AFP, yung credible defense posture, is actually more oriented toward the Navy and the Air Force. As many of us know, ang Philippine military right now is oriented toward the army, internal conflict, insurgency. So if you look at the portfolio, we only have, I think, 10,000 members ng Navy as opposed to like 100,000 or more sa army. So that's a very imbalanced proportion, no? So we need to reallocate more toward the Navy. And I'm very happy right now because during the Independence Day speech, the administration said this: we have to transition to external defense. Secretary Gibo Chodoro has also said this because, frankly speaking, the communist insurgency in the Philippines, while not dead, is actually they're actually pretty much a spent force. They're politically they're very irrelevant, no? Yung CPP, NPA. Now, of course, the government is still continuing with the NTFL, CAC, and all of that. So they will continue with that, but the military as an institution, napakalaki ng kailangan nating i-correct so that we have a better naval and air force capabilities kasi masyado tayong land-based for the past how many years. So we need to correct that. And then yung third point siguro, ano yung kailangan baguhin from the AFP modernization? I would say making use more of yung limited US presence here in the Philippines. So yung US and its allies have donated a lot sa Pilipinas, yung radar system. Yung Australia nag-donate siya ng mga pilot training schools sa Central Luzon, no, a few months back. So Japan is donating Coast Guard assets to the PCG. The United Kingdom and France are very much willing to support naval modernization. In fact, yung one major French company is offering to rehabilitate Subic Bay. And yun talaga yung end game nun, no? Kasi ako, although I disagree na kailangan pabalikin yung mga Amerikano in Subic Bay, I do agree that Subic Bay has to be rehabilitated because it is the ultimate fortress protecting the national capital region. Right now, masyadong malayo yung mga military bases natin. We need to protect it, no? So that's the thing. And then finally, siguro, what's the next step for the Marcos administration? Actually, to a large extent, I actually agree with a lot of the policies of the admin, no? So I think it just needs, at least with respect to security policy, so we just have to continue this direction. Ang kailangan nating ma-prevent in the future is yung policy reversal. If we look at it, the Marcos administration ngayon is actually a policy moderate. Meron siyang mga combination ng ginawa ni Aquino, ginawa ni Duterte. We are in that middle spot. So we have to continue that. And ako dito, I'm very optimistic kasi pag pinakinggan mo yung last electoral debates, no, whether you're talking of Ping Lacson, Leni Robredo, etc., lahat sila, ang position is, we have to have trade with China, but then also we have to continue with military modernization. So ako, I'm very optimistic na after all that we've learned from the Aquino administration and the Duterte administration, yung pros and cons of what they are doing, si Marcos is the new normal for Philippine presidents, no? A moderate president. So that's we just have to continue with that. I'll let the others speak. Sorry.
Yes, thank you so much, Just. Gabi, parang nag-absorb lang kami ng information the whole night. I'm sorry, I just need a really quick commercial. Please follow the host, the PH Roundtable account, because we're doing this political space every Tuesdays and Thursdays. Bago lang tayo masyadong immense ay maano dito sa topic. Yes, I think it's Hans and then Minso. Go ahead, Hans.
Hello. Last question na to, promise. Kasi kailangan ko na umalis. Ano ba yun? Okay, for this next question, meron akong context na kailangan ibigay. So, maraming nang babash kay Duterte dahil yung parang, yung at least nung simula, yung policy niya sa China ay parang masyadong friendly, and thus, dahil naging friendly si Duterte sa China, ina-expect niya na China will be friendly back to them in terms of yung hindi sila atakihin sa South China Sea, mga ganon. Pero nagtataka ako doon kasi in the first place, wala namang ginawang bilateral agreement si Duterte with China na mag-set ng conduct in terms of ano yung dapat nilang gawin sa ano yung dapat nilang conduct pagdating sa military boats or yung pag-harass ng mga fishermen, yung mga ganon. I just want to ask you, why is that never pursued? And ang iniisip kong reason kung bakit hindi is, well, kung ang China ay hindi naman sinusunod yung UNCLOS anyway, what would make us think na susundin nila yung bagong bilateral agreement? And to that, I would say na syempre, ang bilateral agreement, mas binding siya. Kasi kayo na dalawa mismo yung nag-usap, imbis na nag-sign kayo bilang buong grupo. So again, what I want to ask here is, why do you think bilateral agreements with China in terms of conduct in the South China Sea was never pursued?
Oh, that's a great question. Excellent. Si Minso?
Go ahead.
Hello, am I audible?
Go ahead.
Yep, you're loud and clear.
Thank you. Good evening again to all. Would like to extend my thanks for this opportunity to the host and of course to Justin for imparting his expertise. I'm Minsu, half Korean, half Filipino, took my undergrad degree in international relations, major in diplomacy. Though I don't want to digress. So again, while I agree with Sir Justin, with you on most points about EDCA, I just find that the timing of it all is uncanny. Not only the timing, but also because whatever the Philippines is doing, for example, in regards to accepting U.S. military assets, it is seen as provocative, mainly because we have sent an arbitration suit against China. Now, actually, you also mentioned South Korea earlier, and South Korea also has a case against Japan. I'm very well sure you're aware of this, Sir Justin. In regards to Dokdo, this is for South Korea, but in Japan they call it Takeshima. But instead of sending an arbitration case against Japan, We instead mediated it through negotiation, directly like a tete-a-tete. So instead of an arbitration suit, which would have provoked or even inflamed the region, South Korea instead used the diplomatic protest complemented with media. And we find that this is enough to restrain Japan's behavior on the island. Japan actually became less noisy about it as far as their diplomatic blue book is concerned. Now, the Philippines case, why have we not exhausted several mechanisms, no? Like um, the ASEAN Regional Forum, the annual defense security talks, or even the bilateral consultation mechanism? And lastly, we will probably be biting our tongues when we keep calling their bluffs. The US kept doing that to Russia prior to the Ukraine invasion last February 2022. So I find that it is a self-prophesying statement. So really, again, Justin, my overarching question is, as an individual who works in the defense, is it really productive that the Philippine defense pursue competing claims of sovereignty in the SCS region when even international charters, protocols, covenants, conventions, whatever you call it, they do not even intervene in matters that are essentially within the domestic jurisdiction of any state. So again, thank you, Justin, and much appreciated.
Thank you. No, I've heard so many very intelligent questions tonight, so I really love this Twitter space. So let me go by order of the questions that they raised. No, um, on the question he hands on why is bilateral cooperation with China never pursued. No, technically speaking, we have had conversations with them dun sa code of conduct since panahon pa to ni President Arroyo, and during the Duterte administration, we actually used yung tinatawag na bilateral consultation mechanism, the BCM, with China to discuss how to de-escalate tensions and so forth. Politically, ang naging problem kasi dito, even if they were taking place, the government sort of saw this na parang pinapagod lang tayo ng China. No, that's the frank way of talking about it. Kasi as tama yung mention ni Hans, no, even if we're discussing all these agreements with China, if you look at it strategically, China has even during the Duterte administration, no, China has continued to put missiles in their bases in the South China Sea. China has continued to put more maritime militia there, no, which picked up dramatically after 2018, 2019. So from the Philippine government perspective, what happened was it sort of became diplomacy for diplomacy's sake. That's the reason why the bilateral discussion never had much of a fruit, to be honest, because um, what what China has to offer the Philippines in the political and security realm is very minimal. So the China has a lot of donations in the Philippines, but never a lot of defense partnerships. If you notice, so it used to donate, for example, counterterrorism equipment to the PNP. During COVID-19, it donated to the DOH, so forth and so on. But those are parang mga gratis na mga pamigay ng China. We don't have as much of an institutionalized relationship with China compared to the US, right? And the reason for this is that China really doesn't have anything to offer the Philippines in the security realm. That's the gist of it. Kasi, I mean, for example, hindi nga, China doesn't even help us, for example, with military exercises for obvious reasons. Because military exercises, for example, that's part of military training, which helps our combat readiness, which, of course, we have to ask ourselves, does China really want a combat ready armed forces of the Philippines? So, it, but we have to clarify, it's not that the Philippines will reject cooperation with China. The fact of the matter simply is that there was never anything offered aside from the economics bit. And yung economics bit, it's really NEDA, yung mga investment boards natin who are handling that now. So infrastructure projects. So it's really the economics of it. But the point there is, yung economics kasi, you don't need that to be government to government. We have a lot of Chinese investors here in the Philippines that are private entities. They're here because the Philippines has a booming economy. No? We have a booming market. That's why they're moving here. So hindi na yun kailangan i-arrange government to government. And then right now, the Marcos administration is pursuing the resumption of the emergency hotlines, high level hotlines, no. Um, if we're pursuing this right now because during the Aquino administration, talagang height of the tensions between Philippines and China, we had no hotline with them, no. Talagang this was really a major issue. But interestingly, China also didn't agree to move much on this during the Duterte administration. So actually feeling ko ang problema dito is not the Philippine side, it's really China and the way that the diplomatic community of China operates. We have to put this into context. Why is yung foreign affairs ng China not taking so much initiative vis-a-vis the Philippines? Because domestically, since President Xi Jinping assumed office in China in 2013, he has centralized political power. And of course, once you centralize political power, you become more autocratic domestically, no? And I don't mean that as a judgment. I'm just saying that na ganun yung political situation nila. People are actually more fearful to establish initiatives. So ang problema niya, no one is suggesting him things to do. That's what I can see na yung problem ng China. Kaya if you notice, yung mga statements ng China toward the Philippines lately, paulit-ulit lang siya. In fact, yung statement ng China yesterday, condemning yung arbitral award of the Philippines, if you notice the first paragraph, a lot of that is copy-pasted from the previous years. So if you have a political environment in China wherein your leader is purging political opponents, you don't take initiative. And I think that's the reason for it. No, it's really bureaucratic politics why China is like that. Secondly, on the point that EDCA timing is uncanny, I respect that opinion, but I would just like to maybe make a counterpoint to that. Let's look at EDCA from a defense planning perspective, right? Bases take years to build, minimum 3 to 5 years for you to have an operational base. And let's look at the shift in the doctrine of the Department of National Defense. No, during the 1990s, we had what we call threat-based planning. When there is a threat, we will respond. So if you have, for example, an insurgency, then the DND will buy the equipment to respond to that insurgency. But we shifted to what we call capability-based planning later on because we understood na may mga type ng threat that are so serious that if they happen, we don't have an immediate response option. And it will take years to build a response option, right? So that's the same thing with the AFP modernization, Air Force, Army, Navy. In fact, it takes so long to procure the AFP assets that, in fact, our AFP modernization is delayed. So here's the thing. Given that the geopolitical situation right now is worsening and that our military bases are a bit out of date, we're still struggling to upgrade all of them, and the United States has offered to improve those military bases, we have to take it right now because honestly, the benefit of EDCA, we will see this realistically by the end of the administration. Anything before that, we're actually vulnerable. We don't have a response. We don't have a response option. Um, so that's a major, from a defense planning perspective, that's a major issue. We are exposed. And we're exposed not just because there's going to be a war, etc. We're exposed because we don't have the logistics. It's a simple matter of logistics. No? We don't have the air hangars. We don't have a lot of very functional ports in the country. So we need to do it now. So that kind of planning, it cannot be threat-based. So Secretary Gibo nga has said that these things have to be done now because we can't afford to do this if conflict breaks out. Conflict is a very unlikely scenario for us. No? Nobody's actively seeking to invade the Philippines. No? Even China, na yung beef naman talaga ng China sa atin is really about yung mga islands in the West Philippine Sea. They're not actively seeking to intrude on the core Philippine islands, Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao, right? So that's the thing. We need to take a long-term perspective on defense planning. Now, why the US? I understand the concern. No? Why are we doing this with the US right now? I think again, no, same thing with my approach politically because they're the only one offering. That's the thing. If other countries help us do this, then fine. But the problem is they don't have the economic wherewithal to support us. So that's the thing, no. So of course, the Americans are self-interested about this. Let's be honest, John. Nobody gives things for free. But so long as Tia mentioned earlier, and also see Mr. Bud, no? So long as we keep our red lines clear, yung rules of engagement ng United States, we should be safe. We should make use of these assets for Philippine national interest. We are not pro-China, not pro-US. We are pro-Filipino. And we're just, yung US, if you look at it strategically, what is the US? Ang ginagamit ng administration ang United States as an insurance policy, right? In that very unlikely scenario that there's a high intensity conflict in the region, we have a great power in our neighborhood, no? The problem kasi, if you notice, with the Philippines, with our neighbors, sorry, they have a problem of American commitment. During the Obama administration, when China practically occupied parts of Scarborough Shoal, the Obama administration brokered a deal between the Philippines and China. Both of you pull out. China did not pull out. The United States did not enforce yung agreement because it was so fearful of China. At that time, the Philippine Navy barely had any functional warships. So we really cannot, intimidate China at the very least, not to try to occupy the entire Scarborough Shoal. So what happened doon eventually was that they were able to take that entire feature, right? They're able to swarm it. So, and we will honestly, honest to goodness, we'll never take it back. So that's why we have capability planning, because in the event we have those kinds of scenarios, the United States is here. The United States has a clear commitment to defend us, and it makes it harder for them to go back on their commitments to the Philippines, and that's what's important. So that's our national interest. They are our insurance policy. The Marcos administration is using the United States against China. So that's my take on. I do agree no, that a lot of people have different interpretations to this. For example, yung South Korea versus Japan, they tried to deal with it bilaterally rather than multilateralize the dispute. But my short answer to this is Japan doesn't behave like China does. So we cannot make that equivalence between them. And if you've seen the way that China has behaved, in the South China, it's very clear to everyone. China responds to power, and that's what we need to balance right now. Kasi right now the AFP is modernizing, so we need to be able to respond tit for tat as well, without of course escalating things. Who's this?
Alpha
Kai-
One.
Kyla? Is it?
Yeah. Hello? Alpha One? Is that Kona? Hello? Kyla? Alpha One? Yes.
We are so preoccupied with our foreign policy, with our security policy. All these things will not happen kung meron tayong creditable defense. Pinabayaan na kasi natin yung defense natin. So, yan ang nagiging problema natin. Pag kailangan nating mag-respond, we cannot respond dahil nga wala tayong capacity to respond. So, siguro dapat ang maging direction ng country natin is to focus more on economy so that we can attain our good security. Baka why is Malaysia, they can produce frigates and corvettes, but why can but our country is only producing small boats? So bakit hindi tayo magkaroon ng geared toward modernizing our weapon production or ship production? Ang laki-laki ng Subic Bay, but hindi tayo makagawa dyan ng malalaking barko? Kasi masyado kasi bureaucracy at saka red tape sa atin . Hindi tayo makapag-produce ng magandang natin, pero igagalang tayo ng mga kapitbahay natin, including China, if we have a creditable defense. Katulad ng policy ng Singapore, sabi nga ni Lee Kuan Yew, maging parang poisonous fish tayo na pag kinagat tayo ng kalaban, malalason din sila. So they put up a very strong defense, armed forces, army, navy, talagang very modernized. So why can't we do that? Kaya tayo kinakaya ng kapitbahay natin because we don't have we can protect even our wala tayong creditable defense nga yung sinasabi nila. So dapat doon tayo mag-focus yan. Nagugulo yung ating foreign policy, yung ating mga foreign security policy or whatsoever because we are weak. Pero kung strong tayo, hindi natin po problemahin yun eh. Kung strong tayo, kung meron tayong creditable armed forces, air force, navy, hindi tayo tinitignan-tignan na lang ng ano natin. So igagalang tayo, will be respected eh. Yun lang ang problema eh. So siguro it's high time for our leaders, for Congress, magbigay tayo ng time talaga na makapag-establish tayo ng creditable armed forces. Yun lang po.
Thank you.
Maraming
Anything?
salamat. That's a very good point.
Yes. Anything to say about that, Justin? Justin,
Sure.
may phone-in question. Phone-in question.
Meron. Okay.
I think...
Pwedeng respond na ako dun mabilis.
yeah, go ahead, Justin.
Sure
Sorry.
thing. Actually, I fully agree, no? Yun yung naging discussion nung earlier part na ina-explain ko kanina that fundamentally tungkol siya sa kapabilidad ng Armed Forces of the Philippines. Ngayon, politically, ang question lang kasi dyan, meron kasi tayong mga certain arguments dito na nagko-contradict with that goal of modernizing the AFP, no? Halimbawa, yung opposition sa EDCA na bawal, wag kayong maglagay ng bases dyan, wag yung papasukin yung United States sa northern part ng Philippines. Pero isipin mo siya, if you look, okay, tanggalin mo yung United States, China conflict doon. Ano yung prinsipyo na inaatake doon when we oppose that? We are saying that the Philippines doesn't have the right to determine where we should field bases in the Philippines, where we should cooperate with our allies and partners. And that for me is the biggest philosophical problem. Sabi nga ni Secretary Gibo, our defense modernization program, whether that is offensive or defensive in nature, is our business. That should not be anybody else's business. For example, yung China is building up nuclear weapons. Do you see the Philippines filing diplomatic protests sa China na huwag kayo mag-build ng nuclear weapons? No, that's not happening. Ang problema kasi medyo mabait yung mga Pilipino. 'Di ba? Ang mentality ngayon, wag nating gawin 'yan, magagalit yung China diyan, etc. So, that is a debate that we will have to answer down the line. Everybody has a different comfort level of what we think China would allow. But I agree na dapat we have to continue with the AFP modernization. Sorry, you were saying may
Yeah,
someone had
there's
a
a
phone-in
sorry,
question.
Sir Marcos, may phone-in question. Sorry, nawala ako. Anyway, I think it's about actually I'm reading it as her. Actually, gusto ko talaga sanang malaman kung after the US presidential elections, may tendency magbago na naman pakikitungo ng US sa Pinas. Don't you think? So I think it's a good question. Do you have any response to that?
Yeah. Actually, I would say with a high level of certainty on this that insofar as the general direction that the Philippines is supporting Philippine defense modernization, that's not going to change. So right now, diba, si Trump is the front runner of the Republicans. And if we look at the opinion surveys, yung mga Gallup polls, etc., in the United States, the Republicans are actually even more aggressive toward China than the Democrats. So in terms of their level of investment, for example, for EDCA, that's not going to change. I think the only wild factor here is si President Trump has the proclivity to ask its allies to pay for US military bases or US military troop presence, right? So si Trump nanghingi siya ng additional na bayad from Shinzo Abe in 2017. So that's yun yung thing, but I don't think the United States right now is interested in making us in fact they're the ones that are investing money in the Philippines. So it's not going to change. There is yung ang sabi nga, 'di ba, there is bipartisan consensus in the US with regard to how they want to fight China. And the Philippines is a strategic player in that, so they have to be in our good graces as well. So of course there will magkakaroon yan ng discussion, etc., but I think policy wise it's not going to change, no. In fact, nag-adjust na nga ang Amerika if you notice. si President Obama, who was also a Democrat like the current US President, si President Obama condemned President Duterte for human rights violations and all of that, which they realized is quite unproductive for the United States, right? It got them nowhere. So now, change in administration, sa US, of course, there are some groups saying, oh, Marcos, human rights legacy, etc. No, which is a valid issue. But if we're talking about geopolitics, no, Machiavellian approach ang US and Philippines right now, the Biden administration actually sidestepped all those issues because really, no, that's really the way to go. We have to be adults in the room that we have national interest at stake. Yung all these mga minor discussions, hindi yan nakapronte sa totoo lang sa geopolitical alignment ngayon. So that's the thing. So I think there's also maturation on the part of the United States, in fairness to them, no. So personally, I'm quite hopeful about this.
Yes, thank you so much, Justin. Sir Marcos, go ahead.
Hello, thank you. Justin, so far, a lot ng discussion is about security and defense, puro military, I think we should also emphasize now we have to improve our economy significantly and improve our standing sa global community para we can portray power yung lakas natin over other countries and specifically in this case China. Don't you agree?
Yeah. Sorry, nakalimutan ko to i-mention kanina, no. So actually, in terms of foreign policy, according to the team at Malacanang right now, priority number 1 is the economy. All of us here will notice that President Marcos is not like President Duterte in the sense that ang priority topic ni President Marcos is actually the economy. Pag tinignan mo yung initial appointments niya, those are all technocrats, no, professional managers in NEDA, Department of Finance na si Secretary Ben Jokno, yung sa Bangko Sentral, even though it's technically independent from the government, they were very careful of that, no. So in that sense nga actually, dun siya naiba talaga kay President Duterte, who was really very focused on drugs, crime, which are all important issues. But I think that's the right approach na we're focused on the economy. I think kaya medyo skinip ko lang to kanina kasi honestly, the economic approach of the administration since panahon nila Gloria, it's essentially the same. No, of course we can talk about hair splitting, no, yung naiiba, but the essential direction is actually the same. Supporting foreign enterprises here in the Philippines, yung mga MSMEs natin dito, supporting our OFWs, etc. So I think that's a good thing. Yung interesting thing for me that the Marcos administration said is it is trying to diversify our economic partners, and that's very important because it understands that we have a supply chain problem right now because we are so dependent on China. And we're not saying na masama yun na makipag-trade tayo with China kasi totoo naman that a lot of the goods produced by China are very cheap, no? So that's why we buy from China. But in the context of geopolitical competition, and yung China before, we know this na nag-economic sanctions yung China if you do something they dislike, such as nung sa arbitral award na nag-sanction sila sa atin economically some of our agricultural imports. We have to balance the portfolio so we don't depend so much on anybody. But offhand, I think okay na yung balance ng economy natin ngayon. If you look at the imports natin, it's a 50-50 split between US and its allies and China, Hong Kong, Macau. So I think right now it's a good position na hindi tayo masyadong overexposed yung supply chain natin to any single country. But ang problem kasi, we're comparing China with the US and Japan, South Korea, etc. So those are multiple countries. China alone still has a lot of leverage toward the Philippines. So realism, no, Machiavellianism talaga. We want to deprive them of that leverage over us. That's the thing we need to work on. So economically, we need to do something about that. More engagements with India, more engagements with countries in the Middle East. That's very critical. And then finally on economic improvement, kasi ito yung ang economic improvement kasi quiet work ito. We will not always see on TV yung mga pinagagawang economic policies, but so long as we're on the right track, I think This should be a non-star. This should be a no-brainer for all of us. And I would say that the Philippine economy, although medyo ngayon hirap lang tayo because of the pandemic, medyo bumagsak yung export output natin. We are actually on track to be a middle income economy. And I'm a very moderate person. I'm very thankful for all the presidents from Gloria to Pinoy to Duterte. We are actually developing as a country. Wag naman masyadong puro negative tayo all the time na naghihirap ang Pilipinas, because I mean, if you look at, 'di ba? Look at the development BGC, Makati, yung nire-reclaim na area in Manila Bay right now, the development of Mindanao, yung development ng Central Luzon, yung Pampanga, etc., yung mga tourist sites in the north. So we have that going for us. We just need to continue with this. I think this year, if I'm not mistaken, we are on track to have the highest growth rate in ASEAN. So we just need to continue with that. Actually, naungusan natin, I think, if I'm not mistaken, mauungusan natin yung Vietnam, kasi yung Vietnam may political political troubles ang Vietnam domestically. So medyo we're good there.
All right, thank you, Justin. Before I see Alvin, just a quick commercial for everybody. Again, welcome to the PH Roundtable discussion. We are now talking about the Marcos administration foreign policy with Sir Justin, who is a geopolitical analyst. So please follow the PH Roundtable account, and we do this every Tuesday and Thursday. We try to be a non-partisan political space, so please tune in every Tuesdays and Thursdays 9 p.m. Go ahead, Sir Alvin. Sir Alvin.
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Uh, I'm, you know, I know na very very technical itong ano natin, kasi yung we have speakers here na talagang in the know, kumbaga, sa mga nangyayari sa ating foreign policy. But all I can say is, on my personal view lang ito, kasi I'm no foreign policy expert. I just have some basic knowledge lang. So I just want to say na with the parang, kumbaga, how can I say this? Say ganito, China thrives on the US's weakness. Okay? Pag weak ang US, malalakas ang kalaban ng US. Lumalakas sila. Like, we have a very weak US president right now that is clearly kowtowing to China. They cannot do anything about China. Whereas nung President Trump, talagang very tough sila on China, and what happened. Pero nevertheless, kahit sino pa man yung presidente ng Amerika ngayon, kesyo si Trump or si Biden or whatever, talagang lumalakas ang China. Talagang, you know, yung actions ng China is still the same. It's still provocative when it comes to the South China Sea. It still continues to build up their military, and even the US acknowledges this. No, I've seen several reports na talagang tinuturing ng US na geopolitical adversary nila, one of the greatest, sabi pa nga doon na adversary, parang geopolitical, shall I say, opponent ba or something, basta yung opposing force is China. Greatest threat yon, the greatest threat, geopolitical threat ng US ay ang China. Tinuturing na nila. So that's a huge thing, given na the most powerful country in the world is considering China as its greatest threat. So as to our foreign policy naman, I kind of agree with what President Marcos is doing right now. Is just to, at least, for me, it's just trying to balance everything, kasi alam din niya yung limitations natin when it comes to just diplomacy and of course military might. Alam lahat niya ng ating presidente. That's why he is really doing his best to at least unahin or to prioritize the interest of the Filipinos everywhere, not just in this country but all over the world. That's why marami siyang trips abroad. And when it comes to talagang shall I say, yung yung foreign policy natin, talagang masasali natin ang US versus China narrative. Bakit kanyo? Kasi, of course, given yung location natin sa mapa ng South China Sea. No? We are at the very center. How can I say this? Si Trump, naalala ko yung isang interview niya noon, parang nasa foreign trip siya or something. Ang sabi ni Trump, the Philippines is like one of those precious real estate commodities, in this part of the world. That's how he views the Philippines. That's the U.S. president speaking. So the way na yung pagkakasabi ni Trump that time na talagang nakita niya ang Pilipinas na very great asset, very strategic ally talaga. That tells you everything about our country and of course our foreign policy. And I kind of agree with somebody here na nagsalita na talagang in reality talaga yung defense policy natin when it comes to foreign policy is talagang nakalign sa US kasi talagang napakalaki ng tulong din ng US sa capability ng ating military. Tumutulong sila sa ating military modernization. When it comes to economy, of course, napakalaki ng contribution ng US dyan. And also our partners like Japan, South Korea, even India, and also Australia. Lahat yan, US allies. We have defense cooperation very deep, no? Somehow deepening defense cooperation with those countries. So I think, of course, we should always value those defense cooperations. Talagang magagamit natin yan in case na God forbid magkaroon ng conflict sa ating region, no? Kasi given our proximity to Taiwan, kung talagang matuloy yung giyera na yan, kasi very vocal din ng China diyan, na tinuturing niya na probinsya niya ang Taiwan at kailangang bawiin by force if necessary, sabi nga dun sa parang document ng Chinese military, no, ng PLA. So talagang pagdating ng panahon na dumating yung giyera between Taiwan and China, talagang may involve tayo diyan. We have to choose sides, no? And given na yung ginagawa ng ating presidente, he's in a very delicate spot right now, I think, in my own view. Kasi uh,
Yes.
konting pagkakamali lang yan in terms of pronouncements, in terms of policy. Talagang we will dip ourselves into the hot water talaga. Kasi yung position kasi natin yung very position natin, like geographically, even policy wise, talagang napakadelikado. It's really delicate. Uh, it's like a thin porcelain talaga. Konting poke mo lang diyan, talagang maano na yan, mababasag na yan. So I kind of applaud the approach of the Marcos administration right now, na parang sinasabi niya sa atin, okay, sige. We have this situation with China and US. Those are the two, shall I say, superpowers na nagbabanggaan everywhere in the world. No, may interest ang China everywhere. Ganon din ang US. So in every time na magbabangga niyan, there will always be conflict. No, in terms of not just in siguro military, pero that's another story.
Mhm.
Pero in terms of diplomacy talaga, policy wise, lahat
Yes.
ng
Thank you.
lahat ng tinatapakan ng US at China, pag nagbanggaan yan, talagang magkakaroon ng conflict, no?
Yes.
Kaya
Alvin, wrap
siguro
up. Thank
yeah,
you.
dapat maging ready rin tayo with that eventuality later on. Kasi one of my biggest fear talaga is when that Taiwan war breaks out. Kasi you know, sabi ko nga kanina, we have to choose sides, no? Kasi with all of that, shall I say, triangulating that we're doing with China and US right now, talagang, in reality, US pa rin talaga ang kakapitan natin kasi we have MDT with them, we have EDCA with them, we have assistance from them in terms of military modernization. We do exercises with them, whereas with China, we don't have
Yes.
all of that, you know. Yun ang reality. Yun ang reality. We don't have
Exactly.
anything from China except from those grants na
Unfortunately,
Just
kahit nung Duterte administration, napakaraming pangako ng China na
Yes.
ganito,
Thank you
ganyan,
so, Alvin.
walang
Yeah.
dumating. Yeah, walang dumating. So,
All
para
right.
sa
Thank
akin,
you.
yes,
Yes.
last point na lang.
Yes. Thank you.
So in terms of talagang foreign policy, I think I will advise the government also na talagang i-continue lang niya to balance everything. Talagang we're in a very delicate spot. I hope President Marcos will never falter in his vision and in his tracks to to put interest to put the Filipino interest first. So yun lang. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much. That was, I know, good points by Alvin. You want to respond to that, Justin, or we go to Minsu?
Yeah, Minsu, please go on.
Yes, go ahead.
Hello again. Just one last statement before I shut up for the rest of my life. So, going back to my main point um, on diplomatic protests, right? Diplomatic protests coupled with media are suffice to restrain an aggressor's behavior. Now, this is debatable. So, there are some historical instances when this happened. We saw this during the Iraq's illegal annexation of Kuwait, and they left a few months later as a result of international condemnation. And there was the nuclear test of India, the Pokhran. Because of the nuclear test, it had international condemnation as well. The international community halted their foreign aids and G2G credits. Now, when media reported about a Chinese vessel pointing a military grade laser toward our vessel, and further, another example was when a Chinese vessel blocked the BRP Malapascua and Malabrigo, it provoked nationalist sentiments among Filipinos as a result of media. So perhaps that is enough that diplomatic protests coupled with media because we really do not want to destroy the intention and purpose of the ASEAN Declaration on the South China Sea that will eventually turn into a code that is binding to all parties. Now, aside from diplomatic protests, there are also diplomatic negotiations with which Justin answered, and I'm very thankful for that. But I think Sir Justin missed one of my question. This is in regards to as an individual who works in the defense. Is it really productive that the Philippine defense pursue competing claims of sovereignty in the South China Sea region when even international charters do not tackle or intervene in matters that are within the domestic jurisdiction of any state? And also, in regards to South Korea, there are talks in the National Assembly to build their own nuclear capabilities because more and more South Koreans do not believe that the US will help when attacked, irrespective of a mutual defense treaty like what we have. So now, if the Philippines were to be attacked, do you, Sir Justin, or does anyone here believe that the US will really come to our aid? Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Sorry, I missed your question earlier. So you're saying by competing claims, you mean the act of the Philippines raising territorial disputes in international bodies?
Yes, sir.
All right. Uh, this is a bit this is a bit tricky, no? For me kasi ako I'm a realist. So for the way I look at the internationalization of the disputes, we already had the PCA, which for me is enough already. Now, whether I agreed with the PCA ruling na dinimanda talaga yung China and all of that, right now, since tapos na siya, that's already beside the point. Why is that politically important for us? If you notice, during the 2016 right transition of the administration, China was very anxious to get on good terms with President Duterte. So in that way, I'm thankful for that award because it's a bargaining chip for China. Whether or not I agree with it, for me that's already beside the point because it's already there. It's something I will use. Right? It's something that is beneficial to Philippine national interest. Right now, of course, there's a debate whether we want to escalate the. I'm sure you're referring to yung discussion that we want to escalate the arbitral ruling and put it to a vote in the UNGA, right? So there's discussion of that right now, whether the Philippines would want to do that. Honestly, don't have an educated opinion about it, because on the one hand, some people are saying that why do we, if we put it to a vote in the UN, China will exercise its diplomatic leverage over so many other countries and ask them not to vote. So we will just essentially papahiyain natin yung sarili natin, right? If we lose that UNGA vote, no? And then but also on the other hand, there's also merit to that. For me personally, I don't want to raise it in the United Nations right now, because my position is simple. That has already been litigated. We already had the arbitral award. So we don't need to put it to a vote to the UN already, right? Because the arbitration case was between the Philippines and China. It's not up to the vote of the international community, many of whom are are very much reliant on trade with China. So I think it's not that much of a good move if we try to relitigate this entire issue. So that's gonna be a problem. I think in terms of your point on um the ASEAN, to some extent you were saying as centrality of respecting the centrality of ASEAN. Again, I'm going to give a defense perspective on this, right? Personally, even if the ASEAN Code of Conduct gets passed, I don't really expect much from it. It's a piece of paper. But we do it anyway, of course. That's the whole diplomatic exercise of trying to get China to agree to a common set of binding rules. That's a diplomatic victory for us. So that's why we do it. But if we're talking about military behavior, this might sound hawkish to some of the people in this room, but I actually believe that if you want to correct China's behavior, let's focus on capabilities, as mentioned um, by Mr. Bud earlier. We have to focus on our capabilities, and that's when we will deter China. I don't. This is where I disagree with a lot of people who emphasize ASEAN so much, because this is not, as I mentioned earlier, this is not ASEAN's fight. It's not an arena for territorial disputes. Indonesia has made that clear earlier this year, when it became chair of ASEAN. So ASEAN is not the forum for this. But I think the problem is a lot of people are misinterpreting ASEAN centrality. So when I was in the Shangri-La dialogue last month, some of the people were saying, why does Philippines keep on doing this lawfare strategy against China? Why is Philippines engaging in EDCA? You are violating ASEAN centrality. And my response to them, I had a really very aggressive response toward them, because I was really defending Philippine national interest there. And my point was that because this is not ASEAN's concern, right? ASEAN should not be dictating what the Philippines can and cannot do in its territory. And if we're being realistic about this, if you've seen the statement of China last month, China actually made a statement, and China said China is encouraging ASEAN to tell its members, well, we all know that's the Philippines, to urge its members to refrain from destabilizing actions in the region. And obviously, what they are referring to is EDCA, right? But the point is, you can see how China is using ASEAN, right? China is using ASEAN as a means to constrain the Philippines. That's the thing. So that's why I'm a bit skeptical of this whole ASEAN centrality, because China is not the forum for this to begin with. So ASEAN should not be where we settle these types of disputes. So in that respect, I do agree with your point, no. Um, but of course, we do have to refer to the appropriate international bodies. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Uh, Alexi, Sir Marcus muna. Go ahead, Sir Marcus.
Okay, thanks. Just ano. Ah, yung pa lang, suggestin yung pa. I think marami din ko yung lobby na pro-China. Dito lang sa Twitter saka meron silang parang forum na kung saan sila nako-concentrate na it's basically pro-China yung grupo nila na to. Tapos obviously meron din yung sa other side is yung pro-EDCA, pro-US. At saka talagang talagang basically anti-US yung pro-China group. How do you see this? Does it help na ganito, meron tayo nitong ganito? Parang we're fighting, parang China, we're trying to assert our right dun sa West Philippine Sea over China, dun sa uh, inaangkin nilang mga parts. Pero meron yung mga grupo ng Pinoy na pro-China na parang, mali yung ginagawa niyo, huwag kayong ganyan, huwag yung aawayin ng China, gano'n. How do you see these things? What can you comment on how this group act? And yun lang. Thank you.
This is a good this is a great topic. Ako I have 2 points on this, no. Number one, sometimes I give the benefit of the doubt that out of respect for everybody, may mga tao na very fearful of China talaga. So when they are uncomfortable with EDCA, for example, it's not because they're stupid, it's not because they are paid by China or whatever. It's really because that's what they see in the media. So makikita mo talaga doon yung mga Chinese ships swarming all over Whitsun Reef, for example. So ako personally, my approach is to give them respect and to address their points. No? Sometimes, of course, some of them talagang medyo parang propaganda against the Philippine government yung datingan. But yeah, I do agree that it needs to be addressed kasi China is capitalizing on the disunity within Philippine civil society. And it knows that, right? So if you noticed during the announcement of EDCA, we had si Governor Mamba of Cagayan publicly oppose EDCA, right? As a rule of thumb, my advice would be, let's avoid doing that, right? The president announced a policy, and then we have a governor who will say, I don't agree with this. The US should not be in my province, etc. The Philippines is a unitary government. That means the national government decides on these things. So that's why, ako personally, I'm very happy that the administration put its foot down and told Governor Mamba, the national government has decided on this. Please respect it, right? So that's a good thing. That's a good thing there. But of course, we do have to acknowledge that some of those grievances are valid, right? So si Governor Mamba, for example, he was anxious of the EDCA presence because in Cagayan province actually has a lot of investments from China. So we shouldn't just say, oh, this is not important. We shouldn't do that. I think it's important to make everyone have a stake in the policy so that everyone is invested in this. And I'm a bit comfortable with EDCA because I'm sure when those facilities get built down the line, they will use local Filipino contractors, for example. It's going to bring jobs to our economy, right? So it's not just because we're allies with the US, it also has economic benefits. And then, of course, when those American troops and assets are here, of course, they will help boost local economies wherever they are. They will purchase food, supplies, etc. So dissenting opinions. And right now, we actually can see this in the Senate, right? So si Senator Amy Marcos, thing to me, with the opposition to the Marcos administration is that Senator Amy Marcos is skeptical of EDCA. You know who else is skeptical of EDCA? The Makabayan bloc in Congress. They are also the leftists are also skeptical of China, and that's interesting, right? Because you have to think, but these are very unlikely bedfellows, right? The far left and the sister of the president agreeing on something against the US. So I think it's important to have that accountability for the president so he doesn't get overboard. But down the line, maybe perhaps try to have a mechanism wherein a lot of those discussions don't get very public. So, for example, if you notice, in the 2 to 3 months recently, the left Makabayan bloc in the Philippines basically rallied against EDCA bases for the usual US imperialism and so forth and so on. And I would honestly tell you, they really believe in that this is imperialism. Marcos is kowtowing to the United States, etc. So I think we just have to patiently explain to them. But when explanation doesn't work, we have to force a vote. And we have to force a vote because we need a decision point about this. The administration shouldn't be, yung tinatawag natin, ano to, paralysis by analysis, no? At some point, sabi nga ni Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore, at some point you have to stop listening to people and you decide what you're gonna do. And I'm very confident that the Filipino people are going to support the foreign policy of the administration because the surveys reveal as much. There was a recent survey, let me check my notes. 80% of the public supports um, the use of military alliances to assert our sovereign rights. 80% of the public, right? So that means that the support of the administration insofar as itong mga West Philippine Sea issues, mas malaki pa dun sa nakuha nilang boto ng election. There is broad support for this in the Philippines. 80%. We are practically united on this, no? So, we have that going for us and we have to use that to maximum effect. Kasi ako, to be honest, yung opposition to EDCA, for example, all of these are coming from political elites. Pag tinanong mo yung common na tao, di ba? They're actually very pro-US. So, kailangan lang medyo matweak yung discussion to be a bit more pro-Philippines, no? What's the Philippine interest in this? Para naman hindi masyadong pag pinakinggan mo, we're just consenting because the US requested and we have to supply it. So, that's my long answer to this. And then there's also another survey, also 80% 80% public support to strengthen the Navy, the Coast Guard, and to conduct joint maritime patrols in the West Philippine Sea. So I would just like to clarify, we nationally we have a consensus supporting the policy right now. And a lot of the opinions we're hearing against this, that is minority opinion. No, we have to listen to those opinions, but we have to put it into context. Kasi parang may media portrayal ngayon that the Marcos administration is besieged by all this opposition, but actually it's not besieged. If you force a vote on this right now, most Filipinos will agree this is the right thing to do. So the Marcos administration has to move with more confidence on this.
All right, Alex, you want to say
I
something?
just want to say I will re-listen to this recorded space, before I go to sleep, like daily, so that it will be subconsciously imprinted. So that every time I argue with anti-EDCA, I will know what to say. I just want to ask, like, Justin, let's pivot the conversation about what is happening right now with the Department of National Defense. Like, under the helm of Secretary Gilberto Teodoro Jr., what will be our temperament in terms of our what will be the temperament of that department moving forward? Like, you've talked to the secretary, right? In the past,
Yep.
how is it now
Recently,
that he
actually.
is, recently, how is it, like, moving forward? What's going to be the temperament of his department? Uh,
Temperament meaning what do you mean? Priorities niya going forward? Or
yes, in
parang yung
terms of,
approach, or yung
in terms
approach
of
niya to
foreign
the US
policy,
China. Okay, got you.
yeah, foreign policy in general, yeah.
Right. So I know, as many of you, if you follow me on Twitter, you can see that I've talked with the sec. He invited me for a discussion on geopolitics 2 weeks ago. So we had a very long discussion on this, very interesting, and we were pretty much aligned in our view. So I was very very happy with that. No, um, what I can say is I think I would say we have the right person in the Department of Defense kasi very balanced yung approach ni Secretary Gibo. So actually, if you hear some, I won't talk about yung specifics nung diniscuss namin, of course, out of due respect for him, no. So I won't touch on that, but I will touch on what he said in public already, no. So for example, he said na dapat hindi tayo ang naghahabol sa US or China, dapat US and China ang maghahabol sa Pilipinas. We are a value proposition unto ourselves. We are strategic real estate, sabi nga nung one from our audience kanina. And that's basically his approach to foreign policy, right? And I mentioned this earlier, no, na medyo different ito from the Duterte administration. Kasi during the Duterte administration, when we said friend to all, enemy to none, ang interpretation natin doon, talagang neutrality, talagang hindi kami mangingialam dyan. But this administration understands that we do actually have international issues na dapat may position yung Philippines. So, friend to all, enemy to none, actually, para sa akin, medyo maling label na siya for the foreign policy of the Philippines, really. Talagang, ang foreign policy talaga natin is really rooted on our national interest. In fact, the administration is moving the discussion forward by saying friendliness is not foreign policy. We are not here to make friends with everybody. We are here to pursue our national interest. We have strategic goals. We have specific interests that we're going to pursue. So in that sense, medyo transactional yung foreign policy natin ngayon. Very business-like, right? So I think that's a good policy to have. So that's the direction of Sec Gibo, and I agree with that. Ngayon, I would say though, I think one thing that maybe needs work on. I would say this is actually going to be a chaotic next few months for the Philippine military. And the reason for this is right now, 'di ba, kung labas na tayo sa international, let's talk about domestic defense issues. Yung military and other uniformed personnel pension, which actually takes up a lot of our budget, no? That's going to be a major issue down the line, and mahihirapan si Secretary Gibo to navigate that. Baka mamaya magkaaway-away pa yan within the military kung paano natin, i-reform yung pension, right? This is the agenda of the Marcos administration. Tama naman. Talagang fiscally talagang sakit sa ulo yung magiging pension ng military ngayon. So how do we reform that? And kaya yun yung tingin ko na actually, if we're talking of a 1-year outlook, a lot of the defense issues that we're going to face will become more domestic, right? And that's going to be a problem because, for example, if China is watching that na, the military is squabbling, tayo mismo domestically we're squabbling, right? It might take advantage of that. So kaya ngayon, if you notice, ang lakas ng mga statements from the Chinese embassy, no? Very straightforward, very candid. In fact, the Chinese embassy said yesterday na yung decision of the administration to do EDCA, sabi niya, the US is just masterminding all of this, no? Which is, I think, is disrespectful to the president. It's basically saying the president doesn't have a mind of his own, right? And I don't know how the Marcos administration wants to deal with that. So it's going to be medyo magkakaroon tayo ng domestic problems with defense and security in the coming months. So medyo in a vulnerable position yung foreign policy natin, to be honest.
All right, thank you for that, Justin. Sir, sorry, I forgot. Sir Digital, ano nga pala, sir? Sir Bud. Yeah, go ahead, Sir Bud. Sir Bud? Going once? Going twice? Going thrice? Yes. Justin, I have a question though. Because diba, I just wanted, baka you can explain our whole geopolitical situation. I mean, we understand that there's the China-Taiwan conflict that we have to think about, but you also mentioned about meron din pala tayong claims from dun sa, sorry, I forgot na where. Maybe you can give us, Benham Rice. Maybe you can give us a summary of our real geopolitical situation right now, in a sense, in Indo-Pacific, as in what are the things that we should that the government is conscious of, or
Sure.
yeah, thank you.
Right. So the first one, the biggest, no, na-mention natin yung US-China conflict, which is really the biggest geopolitical problem right now. It's US-China competition. However, we also have to recognize that even as US and China are competing, ang tawag nga dito, di ba, the world is multipolarizing. Aside from the US and China, we also have other rising powers like India, Brazil. Indonesia is also expected to become one of the more stronger countries here in ASEAN. So
in relative terms, actually, the US and China will not just be the major players going forward. If we're talking like 10 years down the line, right? So this is the reason why we actually from my perspective, no, we actually have a good geopolitical environment right now because China and the US are very keen na magkaroon ng allies in the region. Yes. And the countries in the middle, they have so much more room right now to negotiate. Kasi tayo yung nilalapitan eh. So we have to use that to our decisive benefit. No? Yes, of course, there's going to be a lot of political tension. But if you would see a lot of the commentary from the academics, they're saying that middle powers, no, such as the Philippines, no, we actually stand to benefit from the strategic rivalry of the US and China. One example, right now, the US is looking, yung US-China is, yung may tinatawag tayong economic decoupling, right? So because they hate each other so much, the US is advising a lot of the US companies to go out of China and produce elsewhere, right? Ang tawag doon sa strategy na yun, friendshoring, no? Friendshoring. Dati kasi during the 1990s, 'di ba, ang ginagawa ng US offshoring. So it wants to produce goods in China, in Vietnam, etc. kasi low production. Ngayon, because we are in a intense geopolitical environment, hindi na lang cost of labor yung issue. The issue is also whether the country has good relations with the United States. And we have to accept this for a fact. A lot of, kahit nasabihin natin China is rising, at least from a Philippine interest perspective, majority of the companies that we depend on for our employment are US companies domestically. Yung call center industry in the Philippines, etc. These are all primarily US companies. So, given that geopolitical tension, what is ang question ko for the administration is, diba, what is our strategy to capture that industry and market that is moving out of China? Right? We need to think about that. Right now, ang nangyayari kasi, yung production na nagpo-pull out from China, yung mga factory na sinasara, pumupunta siya sa Vietnam. And interestingly, right now, ang Vietnam, meron siyang power shortages, right? Kasi sumobra naman ang dami yung factory nila. We have to have kailangan natin i-promote yung Pilipinas. We need to become a manufacturing or industrial center. Kasi yan ang problem natin ngayon eh. We don't have a very big industrial sector. Karamihan tayo agriculture and services. So we need industry production also. Kasi better paying yung jobs in the industrial sector as well. So that's going to benefit a lot of our people. Use geopolitical advantage to our benefit. That's the first one. And then secondly, yung geopolitical context right now. So again, no, medyo different yung approach that I'm telling everybody here. Yeah, yes, the world is scary, the US and China are having a competition. But if you actually look at what's happening right now, there are so many things we can use to our advantage. In the first place, kasi sila nga yung nag-aaway eh. Diba? Sila yung nag-aaway. Where do we insert ourselves in that geopolitical context that's gonna be important? So for me, that's the primary geopolitical situation. And then secondly, for me, the elephant in the room talaga, China. Hindi na lang ho, to clarify this to everyone, hindi na lang ho West Philippine Sea ang problem area natin with respect to a lot of the territorial incursions by China. In the south, yung tinatawag natin na Sibutu Passage, that's actually near Sulu, Sibutu Passage. Nagkaroon tayo ng problema dyan during the last years of the Duterte administration kasi yung China nagpapadaan ng aircraft carrier nila dyan. Which is, it's a really big thing kasi papadala ka ng major warship in that area. And then in the Philippine Northeast, we do have the Benham rice. So it's actually very huge. It has a lot of natural, supposedly it has a lot of natural resources, oil and gas, that we are just waiting to explore and develop and extract. And in that area, walang territorial dispute doon. Atin yun. Walang ibang claimant state to the Benham rice sa northeast ng Philippines. Malapit siya sa Cagayan, Isabela. So, we need to capitalize, or we need to reinforce. Ngayon pa lang, that's why sinasabi ko, whether or not meron tayong problema with China in all those areas, we should already be forward-looking. Magtayo na tayo ng bases doon. Because pag hindi ka nagtayo ng bases dyan, eventually, ang tagal magtayo ng base. Someone else is going to make that area their fishing ground. Right? So we have to be forward-thinking. Whether or not China is there, we have to build military facilities there. That is the first step in asserting our claim. So that's the that's the second point in our geopolitical environment. So I think enough na yun, no? For a general audience. I think those are the major things. We just have to be familiar with geopolitical turbulence na oo, pag tumingin ka sa TV, maraming nag-aaway na mga bansa, no? But if you look at Southeast Asia right now, it's a good time for us, no? One example, if you're familiar with the situation in Hong Kong, China right now is being more repressive in Hong Kong. It's extending its control over Hong Kong. Anong nangyari? A lot of the businesses in Hong Kong, natakot sila sa China. Saan sila lumipat? Singapore. Singapore right now has an kumbaga to some extent an economic boom because dun lumipat yung mga businesses. So when we look at US-China conflict, and this is my advice to everybody, let's stop talking about kanino tayo papanig and let's start talking about, in very clear operational terms, how do we benefit from all of this and what are we going to do? So as I said kanina, I'm not an academic analyst. I'm a policy analyst. What concrete action can and should we be taking in a way that benefits us? So that's how we should be framing these geopolitical conversations. I think medyo pagod na rin yung public trying to discuss kanino tayo papanig, right? At the end of the day, papanig tayo sa sarili natin, right? So we just have to know what we want to do. So that's the problem. Independent foreign policy in itself is not a plan. Independence in itself is not a strategy. The question is, what do you want to do with that independence? That's what's important for us.
All right, since wala pa kayong other question, I have another question. I've been I've been reading a lot about, parang if I remember correctly, I think late last year nagkaroon ng parang tension sa West Philippine Sea with our fishermen. And then parang meron din the laser pointing um incident. Then because of that, lumabas sa mga articles, and if we're made known na parang hundreds na pala yung mga unanswered na formal complaints natin to the embassy of China regarding all this itong mga sorry for the lack of better term, I'm sorry, I just need coffee, hostile or aggressive maneuvers from Chinese Coast Guard dun sa this fisherman natin. So if yung mga protest natin, mga formal protest natin are not answered, what in the defense side of this, what else can the Philippines do to protect our fishermen? Thank you. Justin.
Ay, nakamute pala ako. I'm so sorry.
I see.
Great. Okay. Itong question na to, I think the administration right now has a very clear policy toward this, no. But may mga kulang pa, and that's what I'll touch on. Actually, yung idea na yung China hindi sumasagot ng mga diplomatic protest and also emergency hotlines, that's been going on for years. Even during the Duterte administration, where China allegedly says that we have good relations with them, actually hindi rin sila sumasagot dyan. And even with the United States, actually hindi sila sumasagot. Even with Japan, hindi sila sumasagot. So napakamalaking issue talaga yung emergency hotline, kasi wala tayong emergency hotline with China eh. And lahat ng bansa na naiinis sa China, that's what actually they've been saying. Hindi sumasagot yung China. That is the problem. So ako, from my perspective, mahirap mag-make ng move in that kind of environment kasi ang nangyayari, yung mga Pilipino, sinisisi natin yung sarili natin na, dapat hindi tayo mag-escalate ng conflict dito, etc. But actually, China is being passive-aggressive about this. The fact na hindi mo sinasagot yung phone, military hotlines whatsoever, hindi mo sinasagot yung diplomatic protest, it means you don't care, right? And why doesn't China care? Because it understands that at the end of the day, the strategic situation is actually to their advantage, right? Kahit pa mag-isang daang diplomatic protest tayo, the fact remains they already have bases in that area. The fact remains they have so many ships there. The fact remains they have missile defense systems in that area already, right? And they had those because we allowed them, we tolerated them doing that. So the strategic environment hasn't changed. Now, what can we do for the Filipino fishermen? So right now, yung policy of the Philippine Coast Guard, di ba? Yung sinasabi nga nilang lighting up the gray zone, which is yung strategy ng China. Para sa kaalaman ng lahat, gray zone means yung mga parang ambiguous strategies ng China na legally speaking, you cannot classify it as aggressive, no? So, the way we call it right now is hostile encounter at sea. Halimbawa, yung ginagawa nila na kapag nagpadala tayo ng Coast Guard doon, mapapadala rin sila ng barko nila, sa susundan nila yung Coast Guard natin, no? Ang tawag doon, shadowing. Tapos, ang mangyayari, ilalapit nila yung vessel nila to the Philippine ship. Yung Philippine ship, dahil syempre, takot tayo na magkaroon ng collision, iiwasan yung Chinese ship. Yung mga ganun, that are very, hindi na nga lang passive-aggressive, that's openly aggressive. Pero it's very creative. China doesn't fire a shot. So, ito tingin ko dito, medyo may kulang yung policy ng administration, no? Kasi China is calling our bluff. That, okay, sige, nagtayo ka nga ng EDCA, all these military bases were cooperating with the United States. But, pag nilagay mo yan in a very concrete incident, bagang buntot ng Pilipinas and we will not confront China, right? So, I'm not gonna moralize and say, dapat next time, dapat sugurin yung Chinese ship. It's a very complicated situation, but kailangan natin ngayon ng policy on how to respond to gray zone aggression that goes beyond taking pictures of them. Kasi ngayon yung Coast Guard, we are taking pictures of them, no, reconnaissance, and we are being very transparent, pinapakita natin sa media. Nagdadala yung Philippines government actually ng media para picturean yung mga Chinese activities doon. Right? So it's a policy of transparency. But a policy of transparency is just one component. The second component is, what is your tactical response to China? Kasi until such a time, we don't have a clear operational response to Chinese incursions. We don't have a credible deterrence, no? We can have so many assets, so many ships, pero kung wala tayong clear rule of how we're going to use them, that's another thing, no? A few years ago, yung Indonesia had a very interesting minister, si Minister Susi. Ang ginagawa niya, pag may nakukuha siya, na-apprehend silang Chinese vessels, pinapasabog niya. That's a very dramatic way of doing it, but sinusunog niya yung ships basically, no, to prevent China from yung mga illegal fishermen quote unquote, kasi some of those are affiliated with the Chinese government. It sends a strong message, right? Of course, some people may not be comfortable with that, but I just like to point out, Indonesia has done that for how many years, and they have not gone to war with China. And if you look at it, mas konti yung incursions ng China toward Indonesia than toward the Philippines. And it's proof that sometimes being tough on your red lines actually works. On the Filipino fishermen, yun nga, ako tingin ko, hindi kasi ito masosolve madalian. There's no easy solution to this na kinabukasan papapuntahin natin yung fishermen doon and the Coast Guard will accompany them, right? It's not like that. Kasi it's also a question of how do we deal with the Chinese Coast Guard that have bases in that area. And until they are there, they will continue harassing Filipino fishermen, right? So it's a structural problem. Hindi siya mare-resolve just because, no. So ako, ang tingin ko dyan, we have to just continue with the capability upgrade, no. One of the pillars ng AFP modernization actually I think 2020 no during the last administration inayos natin yung airstrip ng Pag-asa Island pati yung port doon. And that's important kasi yung port na yon is actually important sa mga fishermen natin for their resupply. Kaya actually yung idea na magtatayo ka ng military structure doon, etc. That's actually economically beneficial din siya. Kasi yung mga military outpost na yon, ginagamit natin siya actually also as embarkation points for our fishermen. No? And Vietnam has also been doing that. So I think we should continue with more of those arrangements to protect our fishermen. Kasi ngayon, ang main problem, bakit napaka-konti nang nagfi-fish in the disputed waters is because of the geopolitical tensions. Pero for example, yung Vietnam, bakit ang taas ng fishing volume ng Vietnam? It's because they have a very strong military presence there. Confident yung fishermen nila na pag sumaklolo sila, someone will respond on their end. Sa Philippines, we still need to build that capabilities kasi nga wala nga tayong military fortifications in that area. So we have to build that claim, no. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you, Justin. Anyone else who has a question? Kasi if wala, we will proceed to our last question for Justin and then his closing statement. All right. Yes. So our last question, Justin, for tonight. Again, thank you very much for gracing our humble roundtable discussion. Please, whenever you're available, you can always message us para we can open yet another foreign policy topic kasi everyone is really into this topic talaga. My last question for tonight before you go to your closing. Justin, what do you think? What are we expecting from the president in terms of foreign policy achievements na mababanggit niya sa July 24 for his SONA? What do you think is the highlight or the best accomplishment of the current administration when it comes to foreign policy?
Right. Um hindi ko lang na-touch to no, kasi I'm not an economist, so I did not talk about it at length. But one thing I'm sure of the administration will be raising yung some of the investments we were able to get because of the foreign trips. So that's one thing, no, yung mga foreign trips of the president. We had several multi-billion-dollar pledges from the European Union, from the United States, etc. And that's already in the works actually. So I think the administration will be highlighting this. Yung EDCA, frankly, I'm not sure if the administration will be highlighting that because of the political sensitivities. To be honest, kasi for me, 'di ba, na-mention ko to kanina, just let EDCA take its course. Hindi na natin kailangan ipagyabang yan, hindi na natin kailangan ipamuka with China yung EDCA anyway. We just need to continue with the projects and, that's gonna help the country. We don't need to be very loud about it. In terms of foreign policy, hindi achievement. It's really more of, ang gagawin ng administration right now is a political statement. It will want to position itself in between the US and China, right? It will want to respond to allegations that it's very pro-US. It will also want to give strategic reassurances to China that we're still interested in trade, etc. So, actually, itong SONA na to, hindi siya pang-achievement lang. Kasi if you think about it, no, nagsimula yung mahahabang SONA na yan during the Pinoy administration. Ang tagal-tagal nung SONA, di ba? 40 minutes more than. Pero ang SONA kasi is not a time to have very, very technical reports. A SONA is a time to rally the country. So if the administration will do something, it should be a political statement na if it will note, okay, we had this EDCA, etc. These are major achievements, no? Yung arbitral award, I'm sure the Philippines is gonna raise that as well. And the fact na mas maraming bansa ngayon yung sumusuporta to the arbitral award, India most especially, that's a major diplomatic victory. I think the administration would be wise to raise that. But that said, in context, foreign policy is not going to be the star of the show in the SONA. It's going to be the economy. The surveys would tell you, sa Pulse Asia naglabas ng survey, or the SWS ba yun? The top three concerns of Filipinos are inflation, employment, and economic uncertainty. So the administration has to talk about that. Yung defense and security, to be honest, let's just let the professionals do their work. We agree as a country that the policy right now is in the right direction in defense and security. So, kahit na hindi na yan pag-usapan, basta tuloy-tuloy lang yung mga projects na to, we are in good hands. But the administration has to address yung economic aspects kasi magsasanga-sanga yan eh. Like for example, ngayon, di ba, ang taas ng inflation, what is the administration doing about it? That's high on everybody's mind. No? Ang laki ng tinaas ng presyo ng mga produkto. Even if sabihin natin bumababa siya. Ang mangyayari kasi dyan, if the administration is unpopular on the economic front, people will start to question the defense policy. Even if they agree with the defense policy, magiging collateral damage yung defense policy, magiging unpopular yung defense policy by extension. So that's what's gonna happen. So I think that the Marcos administration has to address first what's high on everybody's mind. Itong foreign policy, hindi siya maging kailangang star of the show because foreign policy takes time. In fact, I would actually make an argument. Wala pa tayong na-achieve talaga in defense policy because it will take years to see whether this is going to be effective, no? We have to look at whether kokonti ba yung Chinese incursions in the South China Sea, etc. Let's not be too proud, no? If we see na wala pa lang na-achieve yung EDCA, then we have to revise, no? If we see na medyo matagal yung AFP modernization, we have to revise. Everybody has to be willing to be proven wrong and adjust accordingly. That's how we're going to solve this issue. So that's my thing. So I think that's also my concluding thought already na yung friend to all, enemy to none, no? That's a nice slogan, that's a nice statement, but we have to make a clear statement. We're not being friends with everybody. We are here for business and we're going to push for all of this. So that's how we're going to go forward. Peace is not peace is a product of a successful, credible deterrent posture. We will not pay peace at any price. That's the thing, no? We will not just go ahead with what China says and we will not be intimidated. At the same time, we're not going to go with whatever the US is telling us, no? So we have a very clear agenda and we're going to pursue that. We're pursuing an independent foreign policy and we have a very clear idea what we're going to use independence for. So I think that's my concluding remark. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Justin, for being with us tonight. Thank you for everything that we've learned the whole night and for answering all of our questions. I think I can speak for all of us here na super salamat sa lahat. Please follow Sir Justin. It's Justin underscore Bakisal. So yeah, and we are doing this with this PH Twitter Space roundtable discussion every Tuesdays and Thursdays 9 p.m. So you can just follow our official account, which is at PH Roundtable. Sir Justin, I just wanted to ask your permission because we're repurposing all of our recording into a podcast episode as well. So yeah,
Yeah, sure thing. Sure thing.
yes, thank you so much, Sir Justin.
Maraming
Again,
salamat din to everyone who was here, no. So I know we have different opinions politically, about foreign policy, but for me, what I'm happy is everybody is talking, and that's what's important. We have to talk first, so we come to a common understanding. And at the end of the day, hindi naman kasi tayo yung magkakalaban with respect to defending Philippine territorial integrity. So I'm glad I had this conversation.
yes, hello, Sir Justin, you're still there. Yeah. Yes, and all of us, as in, I've been receiving DMs from our listeners, that they are really thankful for your presence here tonight. Alex,
Just,
you
are
want
you
to
on
say
mute?
something? No, I am. Am I?
No,
I think.
yeah, like this has been a very insightful space, and that is really our objective here, right? Doing around, was this like a round table, or yeah, what it was like a,
A round table.
yeah, like it was a very insightful one. So I encourage everyone to like, if you arrive late on this space, you can listen to this sa recording. And thank you so much sa mga nag-participate, especially those who have said their questions to our guest speaker. Just any more like closing remarks?
Yes. Yeah, we will have more guests next week. Pero I'm still super, ano, may hangover pa ako dun sa the whole conversation. Because admittedly, I'm not really into foreign policy, as in, parang it's not really my expertise. And so I'm just, I'm
You
just,
know what? Yeah, this is like a good, listening to this space right now, or the recording. It's a good primer to get started. Like if you haven't been updated much with what is happening with in terms of the foreign policy of PBBM admin. So this is one good primer. So share this space away, the recording, di ba, Just? And
yes,
then
yes.
follow this account, please. Follow Laetera, follow Just, and all the speakers. Nina,
And Sir Justin, yeah, and Sir
yeah,
Justin.
Justin is still here. Oh, yeah, he went out already. Follow Nina and Buxi, Sir Buxi, Marcos, and everyone here on the space.
Yes, we have.
Uh,
Sorry, Alex. I'll cut you off because we have 3 minutes. I just wanted to say that our Spotify. We have our Spotify na. It's PH Roundtable discussion. So we already uploaded our space with Music Edu Punay. This regarding the DSWD food stamp program. So please share that. We will also be sharing this space with Justin regarding the foreign policy of PBBM. We will also share the our space with the secretary Ted Herbosa, and of course our upcoming spaces there. So all you need to do is to search PH Twitter Space Roundtable Discussion on Spotify, and you will see there. Again, thank you so much, Justin, for gracing our humble space. Thank you, Leidera and Alex, for co-hosting this space. Thank you for all our speakers for all your questions. And yeah, I think we should
Thank
end this
yeah.
now.
Closing. Thank you for joining us today on this insightful roundtable, where we talked about foreign policy. So as we conclude, let us remember that foreign policy shapes not only nations but also the lives of individuals.